This happened to my parents back in the late 80s. They were in their mid-20s when this all occurred. My parents decided to go camping in cool California. When they got there, it was kind of late. My mom was sitting down on a log while my dad was unpacking the truck. While sitting down, she heard walking around the campsite, so she went and quietly told my dad she heard something walking around. They got the hell out of there just in case. They drove about 3 miles down the road with their headlights off so they wouldn't be followed. Once they got there, they set up camp and they began to drink their asses off while listening to a boxing match on the radio. Eventually, they settled in for the night. Now, they don't know for sure that this next event is connected to the first, but they believe it is. So they settled in, and my dad was asleep far before my mom. My mom was in the halfway state where you're half awake and half asleep. Suddenly, she heard footsteps outside the tent. She abruptly snapped back to consciousness and listened. She tried waking my dad, but he was way too out of it. She listened for what seemed like hours, when suddenly, she heard the words, "Here I am, I'm going to kill you," from outside the tent. While saying this, the man ran what she believes to be a knife along the tent. She could hear him walking and dragging the knife. She was literally frozen. She couldn't say anything or move. With her mouth agape, she finally snapped out of it and screamed, "Jim, grab the shotgun and kill that son of a bitch." With that, my dad finally awoke. They heard snapping of twigs and footsteps and heard the guy running away. Of course, my parents didn't have a shotgun. It was a bluff that actually worked. My dad got up seconds later and began to run after him, but he was long gone. After that, my parents decided they were getting the fuck out of there before anything else happened. When they got to their truck, they found out that their tires had been slashed. They were in the middle of nowhere and had no way out with some maniac that wanted to kill them nearby. They actually tried blowing up the tires with one of those things you use to blow up rafts. Obviously that didn't work, but they had to try, right? About an hour or so later, a ranger that was patrolling the area came along and helped them out. He brought them back to town so they could get their tires fixed. While talking to the ranger, they found out that he had been searching for any suspicious activity due to recent murders nearby. My parents were likely the murderer's next victims. I tried to find some of the murder cases online, but was unable to. I began babysitting at 13 to earn some extra money to spend horribly on embarrassing things like Fall Out Boy's CDs. I would almost always work for my dad's clients and get referred by word of mouth. I was babysitting for this one family who had a little girl, 9, and a little boy, 7. The parents seemed okay, if a tad crotchety and awkward, giving me a full schedule to follow and jokingly threatening to beat any boy who might mysteriously show up after they left. It felt cruel for them to accuse me of knowing a boy, given I basically looked like an overgrown baby with frizzly hair at that age. Almost immediately after the parents had left, the little girl started singing the words "We're all alone" in a creepy high-pitched voice. "I know," the little boy chimed in. "Let's play rape." Looking back now, I know the kid probably just heard the term on TV, knew the word was shocking, and said it just for a reaction. I totally bought into it at the time, sputtering, wide-eyed, and changing the subject quickly. These kids were hell for the next hour. I wouldn't let them watch South Park on the TV because their parents did not seem like the type to allow their precious 7- and 9-year-old to watch a show like that. As soon as I said no, the little girl said casually, "Oh, that's fine. We'll just go play PlayStation in the family room. Feel free to watch it out here." But I knew exactly where that was headed. I said they could watch any other TV show in the living room while I made them dinner. The parents had left instructions to make them sandwiches. I could handle that. Before I even got out the bread, I heard a massive crash. It seemed like the little girl had broken a glass. Tutting and pissed, but ultimately with no way to punish her, I cleaned it up while these two incredibly weird kids watched with wide eyes. Dumping the broken glass into the trash, I went back to making the sandwiches. I'm a vegetarian, so while the kids had chicken, I made a simple salad one for myself. Just as I was finishing, the little boy screamed out in what sounded like an exaggerated scream of pain. Nonetheless, I ran over to the couch in the living room to check on him. My ankle, he howled kind of dramatically, flopping back into the couch. By the way he yelled it, I could tell he was a horrible actor. While I tried to figure out how he had allegedly hurt his ankle, the little girl slipped out of the room. Peripherally, I was aware of this, but didn't really pay it any mind. I was focused on this little boy pretending to be in pain. He kept saying, I went to stand, but it hurt too much. I don't know. He kept saying this over and over until his eyes suddenly flicked to just behind me where I could see the little girl standing with a perturbing smile on her face. And just like that, he was miraculously healed. At this point, I was just thinking these kids were really weird, craved attention a little too much, and probably needed more parental involvement. Whatever, I was 13 and that $60 was only 4 hours away. I set out the sandwiches for the two to eat at the dining table. Then I went to get us all soda and returned. After pouring soda for both of them, I realized they hadn't even taken a bite of their sandwiches yet. I asked them what they were waiting for. Then they smiled. For you to take a bite of yours? For some reason, I felt like my heart dropped after she said this, and I'm so glad I had the gut feeling to open the top part of the sandwich, because when I did, I saw glass. Broken glass. Broken glass that I'd put in the trash. I stared in horror at the two kids staring at me with menacing grins. I lost it, shouting at them, explaining they could have easily injured my mouth. What's wrong with you two? Instead of crying or apologizing or pretending to be ashamed or confused, these two little fuckers began laughing. Not like kids, it was too low. It wasn't that silly, typical kids laugh. It was low and threatening. I'll never forget that noise. My immediate reaction was, these kids are too young to be laughing like that. I called my older sister, cried about what happened, and she came and stayed there with me. We left the house with chills after the parents arrived. I never babysat for those two again. What I can't get past is the level of premeditation that went into sprinkling that broken glass into my sandwich and the totally remorseless way they responded to my getting upset. They were unlike any two kids I've ever met before. This happened 3 years ago, August 2013 at the time I'm writing this. I'm 25 years old, and a few years ago, me and 4 of my buddies who are all the same age as me were on our way to New Hampshire for a vacation, or a 1-week trip rather, to a small getaway home that my buddy Johnny owns. It's in a very rural area, which is ideal for hunting, skiing, off-roading, paintballing, and overall just having a nice rural escape from the city. Why in New Hampshire, you may ask? Well, apparently his grandparents owned the land as their own little vacation spot before they passed, and he didn't want to sell it. This was the first time he'd be going up there for a whole year. We had a late start to the day, so we left Massachusetts around 3 o'clock, and after making a bunch of stops on the way there, we were finally just about there at about 7:30. It was starting to get dark now, and the isolated country roads were a bit spooky at this hour. We pulled onto the property off the dirt road, and Johnny slammed on the brakes and said, "Oh my God." We all looked at the home and saw the front door was open, and Maddie, one of my other buddies, pointed out the flashlight shining around inside the home that we could see through the window. "Dude, we gotta get the fuck out of here," I told him. Johnny did something that surprised all of us next. He stepped on the gas, approached the home, and laid on the horn for a good 10 seconds. The lights coming from inside the home went dark, and there was now nothing but a dark, unlit home with the front door open in front of us. Johnny was like, "Alright, let's go," as he aggressively left the car, ready to confront whoever was in there. We all followed behind. Johnny ran up the front porch, stormed into the home, flashlight in hand, and started yelling like a maniac. My heart was racing as I entered the home. Johnny told Maddie to run down to the basement with him, while me and the 2 others scouted the main floor. We all used our phones as flashlights. The electricity wasn't turned on yet, of course. Alec checked the kitchen, Amir checked a small bedroom and bathroom, while I checked a master bedroom down by the end of the home. It was seemingly empty, but I was afraid to check any of the closets. I reached out my hand closer to the doorknob of one of the sliding closets, but that's when I heard Maddie and Johnny screaming from the basement. At the same time, the closet door in front of me pulled open with force and somebody emerged quickly, grabbing me and locking me in a hold. Before both of my friends ran downstairs, I got their attention by yelling and they came to my aid. They both pulled the guy off of me and he ran out of the house. We all ran downstairs expecting to find more intruders, but found something much more disturbing. Not only were we greeted to a putrid smell, but we were also immediately greeted to the gruesome sight of 2 dead bodies, not just clean, unwounded corpses, no. These were bloody, missing limbs, blood was splattered on the concrete floor. It was the most disturbing thing, no doubt, I have ever seen. We all ran as fast as possible out the house in an effort to find the man who attacked me, but it just wasn't possible. Forests surrounded the house, and it would be pointless. The sheriff's department came to investigate. It became a huge scene with police lines, people taking pictures and fingerprints and everything. The 2 victims were identified as Indian barbershop workers. The cause for the murders is, as far as I know, unknown. I would refer you to Johnny for more information, but I'm not going to invade his privacy and leak his information to strangers like that. When we went home, we didn't speak to each other for about a week. We were all emotionally scarred in a sense, at least for a while. Now, it's nothing more than a story to tell.
My dad has always been too nice of a guy, like a pushover. I'll just start the story with that. I don't say it for no reason. We live in uptown Chicago. We don't have a huge family, so our Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings are always small, like less than 6 people. This was Thanksgiving night of last year, 2019. Dinner was almost done already. My dad was picking up some last-minute foods like stuffing and cranberry sauce at the corner store since we didn't have any. My mom and I started setting the table, while my brother and grandparents sat at the table. My dad finally returned, but with more than just stuffing and cranberry sauce though. He brought someone along with him. It was this middle-aged, dirty-looking man in a green puffer jacket and black pants. He looked homeless. My dad introduced the man as Stefan, and said he would be joining us for dinner tonight. My brother and I exchanged surprised, uncomfortable looks. Then my mom and I did the same. As my dad started preparing the stuffing, he was telling us how he met Stefan alone in the cold streets, and said we as a Christian family should do the right thing and invite him into dinner, as no one should be alone on Thanksgiving. My grandma invited the man to sit with us. I could tell my mom wasn't comfortable with this as she whispered stuff in my dad's ear. Too late now though, the man was already seated at the table. Good thing I didn't sit next to him because I could smell his clothes from across the table. I didn't understand what my dad was thinking with this. When all the food was finally on the table, everyone sat down and we did our prayer. My brother and grandma attempted to hold hands with Stefan, but he didn't grab their hands back. I low-key watched him as we all prayed, and he just sat there, his eyes bulgingly wide, his mouth not moving. He just sat there like he didn't want to be there. After the prayer, we all began to eat, and at least 3 of my family members tried talking to him at some point. He didn't seem friendly at all though. His responses were very dry and one-wordish. It made the dinner a little uncomfortable. I didn't know what my dad saw in this man or why he felt comfortable bringing him into our home. I get trying to help the needy, but there was another way to do it than this. He helped himself to some food, but even the way he ate was really messy. Like his fingers were really greasy, some food got in his hair. It wasn't pleasant to watch. Now you may think I'm just trash-talking a homeless person, so let's move past that. Eventually Stefan said, "Excuse me, I gotta go to the bathroom." My dad pointed him in the direction of the bathroom, which was down the half flight of stairs down the hall to the left. He got up, not saying thank you, and followed the directions. Once we were sure he was out of earshot, my mom and grandparents started asking questions like what the hell is wrong with my dad bringing that man in here? My dad whispered that he felt terrible and wanted to do something right. My mom questioned how we were going to get him out of here now. My dad insisted that we were being good people though, and that we'd agree eventually. We continued eating, till my brother asked, "Where is he? He's been gone a while." We all agreed it was strange, so my dad went down the stairs to the bathroom to look. He came back up a few seconds later saying he wasn't in the bathroom. My grandma's looked very distressed as my grandpa started cursing in Italian. My brother, my dad, and I started checking the whole apartment. My dad was calling Stefan's name the whole time. We checked all the bedrooms, all the closets. Somehow he wasn't anywhere. However, the window in my parents' room was open, enough for someone to climb through. So we assumed the obvious. My mom came in yelling at my dad that this is what happens for him being stupid and letting a potentially dangerous person into our home. We all had to agree, sadly. My dad closed the window, and we tried to go about the rest of our dinner normally. But of course, the whole time we talked about the bizarre encounter. After dinner, we had dessert. Then eventually my grandparents left. The four of us cleaned up the table and dishes, and a couple hours later, everyone dispersed to their rooms for bed. I'm being very loose with the time frame because this was almost a year ago, but I believe it was another hour later that I finally turned off my TV for bed. The silence in the room allowed me to hear it. The breathing. I heard it in my room. Not my breathing. I was frozen stiff. I didn't even want to move or sit up. I didn't know where exactly in the room it was coming from. I just looked for the door to my room, trying to sum up the courage to run. I heard the faintest shuffling sounds, like of the fabric of a jacket, and I heard, almost in my ear, "Shh!" and a hand pressed down on my neck. That's when the scream I'd been building up exploded out of my mouth as I literally sprang out from the bed and into the hall, calling for my dad. Everyone came out from their rooms and looked down the hall toward my room when I said Stefan's in there. Shockingly, Stefan stepped out from my room, looked at us, and walked out the front door as my dad yelled at him to get out. Of course, without getting physical because he's a big softie. Stefan was long gone by the time police finally showed up. The police said the important thing was that he left and none of us were hurt, and now just to make sure to lock the door and windows. They took our description of Stefan and they left. I like to think my dad learned his lesson from that. You can't trust everyone you meet. For Black Friday a few years ago, I went to Best Buy. Well, technically it was midnight the night before Black Friday. My local Best Buy is always open late the night before Black Friday. I went with my best friend Taylor to look for a new laptop and maybe whatever other stuff caught my eye. We split off to look for our own things. While browsing the laptop section, someone in a blue Best Buy shirt approached me asking if I needed help. I gave him specific specs I was interested in, and he started looking around with me. He showed me one laptop he claimed he really liked, then asked me what it was I'd be doing with the laptop. I found it to be a slightly odd question, but maybe it was part of his sales pitch. I said just for school and general web browsing kind of deal. After this point though, he seemed more interested in me rather than helping me. Like he was asking a bunch of personal questions like where I'm from, where I go to school, etc. I don't want to sound self-absorbed, but I do get a decent amount of male attraction when I go out. Anyway, I started realizing he seemed to be hitting on me, and I found him overall creepy, so I reminded him politely about the laptop and that I was in a hurry. He was relentless though. He actually asked for my phone number after that. I made it clear to him I was uninterested. Luckily I locked eyes with Taylor, who happened to be walking over, and I mouthed the word help to her. She understood, and she came over and called my name, saying, "Come and hurry." I said, "Sorry, I have to go," to the creepy guy, and followed Taylor away. We walked to the other side of the store. I told her I didn't want to see that guy again. He was obsessive and creepy and didn't get the hints. We left the store after that with plans of going shopping elsewhere tomorrow. We were both starving though, so we went to the nearby diner, which is open 24/7. We sat at a booth and looked at the menu. The place was practically empty at this hour, except for a lone man sitting at the bar, seemingly looking at the menu as well. His back was to me. I didn't notice him there 5 minutes earlier. He was in a gray jacket, but I recognized his hair. I whispered to Taylor to look at him. As we looked at him, he tried to subtly turn to look at us, but when he realized we were already staring, he looked away. It was him, the Best Buy worker. "Oh my God, he followed us," I whispered. "Let's go," I said. and we got up and left the diner. We hurried to my car, and I drove us home to my house as fast as I could. Taylor was sleeping over that night. To put it short, eventually there were 3 slow knocks on the living room window. We both shrieked and didn't know what to do. My apartment is on the bottom floor. It's him, we kept saying. We went to the window, but oddly couldn't see outside, like total blackness. The view of outside was blocked. We were too creeped out. We had to call the cops. When we got a knock on the door from police, we immediately felt safer. So it turned out the reason we couldn't see out the window is because a shirt was hung over the window, blocking view in or outside. Not just any shirt, a blue Best Buy shirt. Pinned to the shirt was a post-it note that said, "I don't work at Best Buy, bitch." So the police recommended I file a harassment charge. But the problem was I didn't know his name or who it was. They said I could get a lawyer and get the surveillance footage from Best Buy to find the guy, but it sounded like a lot of work. I let it go, but I stayed at Taylor's apartment for a few days. I still can't believe that guy followed us all the way to my house. Some people are dangerously crazy.
Number 4. Me and the girlfriend were on our way to her parents' house. I was invited to Thanksgiving dinner with them, which was a huge honor for me since I'd only met her parents 3 times. I was also nervous since her grandparents and aunts and uncles would also be there who I had never met. We had a long trek from my house to her parents' house. It would be a good hour-long drive. About 45 minutes into the drive, we had to stop for gas. We pulled up into a literally dead Gulf station right off the highway, and I decided to fill up with premium for once to do my car a favor. Of course, it was cheaper to pay with cash, so I went inside with my head down as I dug my hand inside my wallet searching for a 10 and a 20, and when I pulled the bills out, I instinctively looked up and said, 30 on 2 please. But I stopped mid-sentence. There was no one there. I looked for a bell on the counter. None. I simply called out, "Anyone there?" There wasn't even a back door behind the counter that you would assume would lead to some kind of employees-only room. No, it was just completely empty. The only other door in this little gas station besides the entrance was the single bathroom, and that door was open, exposing the blackness from within the bathroom. I figured maybe whoever was manning the cash register may have just gone outside for something. I walked back outside and shrugged my shoulders at my girlfriend out of confusion. I looked around for maybe a porta potty or an ice machine or something that could be distracting a potential cashier, but there was nothing. It was a relatively small little station with foliage surrounding it in almost all directions. I figured maybe somebody could be behind the building smoking a bogey or a doobie, so I went back there as a final attempt. Nope. Just a dumpster sitting under a dimly lit roof light. Ugh, I figured I'd just pay credit at this point and turn it back. But as I did, somebody from out in the woods called over to me in a kind of whispery yell. My heart skipped a beat when I heard this. Hey! Hey! I kept hearing it from the woods. I took out my phone and flipped on the flashlight just to skim the outer tree line for anybody who could be hiding in there. As my now shaking hand rotated the phone slowly, the light momentarily revealed somebody from behind a tree. I took off back to the car and stepped on it out of there. My girlfriend was scared shitless just in reaction to my fear. I told her about the bizarre thing that just happened, and from that point on, she kept looking through the rearview mirrors just to make sure we weren't being followed. We pulled up to the next gas station we could find, this time one that actually had a cashier. I paid him $30 and began filling up. A van pulled up to the pump right behind mine, and a man wearing a cap stepped out staring intently at me. I tried to act as if I didn't notice him, but when it got to the point where he was staring at me for at least 20 seconds straight, I had to look at him and ask him if there was a problem. He finally turned away. The second I was done, I hopped back in the car and took off once more. We made it to her parents' house safely, and I don't believe we were followed. Now, I wouldn't have shared this story if it weren't for the fact that a few weeks later, I did some research and found out that a 33-year-old Indian man who worked at the gas station we had stopped at had been murdered and his body was stuffed in the woods behind the station. I immediately gave the police a tip about the guy who I saw at the station who was surely caught on camera. The following year on Thanksgiving, a similar murder happened at another gas station. We have since nicknamed him the Thanksgiving Killer. I fear only the worst once more this year, as he has still not been caught. Number 3. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. It was Black Friday, meaning me and my brothers were going video game shopping. Our first and only stop was Walmart. The place was absolutely mobbed, and being Walmart, it was mobbed with the wrong kinds of people. Gross, weird, and just creepy people everywhere trying to save a few bucks on already cheap products. We rode the escalators upstairs to the video game section. I was looking for the latest Call of Duty game personally, but my brothers were looking for some other game I don't remember. Then, out of nowhere, some creepy, heavy, oldish man who smelled like vomit walked up to me and said, "You like video games, huh?" "Yeah," I said. I began to slowly slide away just to show that I wasn't interested in conversation. "My son likes video games too. Maybe you should come over and play some with him. He really craves company." The man gave me a creepy smile. "Oh, no, I'm not from around town, sorry." That's all I could think of saying. I didn't even give him a chance to keep this conversation going. Hell, I wasn't obligated to stand there and talk to this guy. I simply gave him a smile and called my brother's name out while walking away just to seem distracted. I did a quick backwards glance. He was just staring at me as I walked away. I made it to the next aisle over and immediately felt comfort in being next to my brothers. I waited around until they finally found their game and we headed over to the checkout counters. The lines were insane. I knew it would probably take 10 to 15 minutes just to make it to the counters, so I took that opportunity to check out some of the jeans and t-shirt sales. At one point, I found myself in probably the most secluded corner of the store checking out some t-shirts when someone grabbed my arm hard. I thought it was my brother messing with me, so I turned around and told him to fuck off. But it wasn't him. It was the man. I started calling for help, screaming that I didn't know this man. Some people came over and stared, but that was about it. The man let go and walked away. I don't know what he was thinking or planning on trying in such a public place. I didn't tell my brothers what happened out of embarrassment, but they picked up on the fact that I was quiet afterwards. "It's nothing," I kept telling them. We got into my brother's Camaro, and when I sat down, I looked to the entrance of the Walmart. There he fucking was, sitting at the bench, facing me. As we were leaving the lot, we had to pass right in front of the store. I got one last look at the creepy man. His head moved ever so slightly to constantly face me, even through the car window at night. I gave him the finger, but it didn't seem to influence him in the slightest. That was the last I ever saw of him. Walmart attracts the weirdest people. Number 2. It was Black Friday 2013, and I decided to be one of those people who gets up at 3 a.m. to get some early deals. Home Depot was having crazy deals on artificial Christmas trees, so I wanted to get there early and buy one for my family. They opened their doors at 3 a.m. on the spot, 3 hours earlier than usual for Black Friday. Surprisingly, only me and one other guy were waiting to get in. I guess everyone else was at Best Buy or the mall. I found a nice 9-foot-tall artificial Christmas tree, originally for $200, but at that moment half off for only $100. I asked one of the few employees working at that hour to help me carry the box to the checkout and then to my car. The parking lot was still surprisingly empty for Black Friday. I figured maybe I didn't have to come so early. I tipped the guy and got in my car ready to leave when someone knocked on my window. I lowered the window
and some guy, mid-20s, beanie, black, and tall, leaned into my window asking if I had change. I opened the little compartment in between seats where I normally keep change, and it was actually empty. I didn't want to have to hand him a 10, so I said, "Nah, man, sorry." He looked disappointed, and I actually felt bad. He then asked me if I could give him a lift to the nearest gas station. I was a bit nervous about letting a stranger in my car, but guess what? I let him in. He did not thank me, which kind of hurt, I guess because I'm a little sensitive. I asked him if he knew of any close-by gas stations. He just said, "Nah." A few seconds later, I asked him why he needed to go to a gas station, and I swear to God, he didn't answer. It's not like he didn't hear me. He just flat out ignored me. I stopped looking at him at that point because I was feeling a bit uncomfortable now. I kept driving down main and side roads, but there was no goddamn gas stations anywhere. I was trying not to look in his direction, but I could tell he was staring at me. Every turn I made, every stop sign I stopped at, he was staring at me. I was sweating now. This guy was freaking me out. I felt like at any moment he could just grab my throat and I'd be done for. At last, I could see a gas station just beyond a light which had just turned red. Why did it have to turn red just now? I thought to myself. I could still feel his stare, even as I looked the other way. I finally decided to sum up the balls and looked at him. I felt his cold, emotionless stare run straight through my eyes into my soul. Are you okay? I asked him. He ever so slightly nodded his head, almost not even noticeable. The light turned green, and I pulled into the gas station. He stepped out and stood by the sidewalk and watched me as I pulled away. When I got past the intersection, I laughed out of joy and the ridiculousness of the situation. But then I realized something. I patted myself down and then began to panic. I was missing something. My phone. I was only a few blocks away, so I made a U-turn and headed back to the gas station. He was gone already. I drove home and confirmed that my phone was missing. I knew I had left it in the cup holder of my car. My phone had all of my info on it. I contemplated calling the police, but I didn't. I couldn't even sleep that night in fear of some freak stranger having my address. The next night, after getting home from our 2-day delayed Thanksgiving dinner, I found my front door was open and my entire house was trashed. I called the police with my neighbor's phone. They didn't find him in there, but they found his prints everywhere. The only thing, the prints did not match anyone on record. Number 1. It was Thanksgiving. I had half the family over, along with the next door neighbors, Tom and his wife. They don't have a big family, so they used to come over to watch the game with us on Thanksgiving. After eating dinner, we all sat in the living room to watch football, except for my daughters Tracy and Michelle, who aren't into football. At the time, Michelle was only 13 years old, and Tracy was 16. During halftime, I decided to go up to Michelle's room to get her to come down. She finally budged and came down to the living room. Me, Tom, and a few in-laws went outside to smoke. Me and Tom talked about his son, Sam. Apparently, Sam had gone back home to be alone and watch movies. He had been with us earlier. Tom joked that he was probably just watching porn, though. I laughed. I stared up at one of the windows to my house, the window to Michelle's room. There was someone looking out the window. What the hell is Michelle doing back in her room? I thought. But then I realized that wasn't Michelle. In fact, I didn't know who the hell that was. I excused myself from the group and stormed back inside and upstairs to Michelle's room. Michelle followed after she saw me enter her room. "Did someone just come in here?" I asked. "No, why?" I looked around the room. It was completely empty. I nudged Michelle to go back downstairs while I turned off the lamp. We went back to the living room where the game would be starting up momentarily. I finally decided to ask everyone if anyone had been in Michelle's room at her window. Everyone either said no or shook their heads no. Someone had to be lying. I heard a slight thud come from upstairs in Michelle's room. I ran back upstairs, again with Michelle following me. I flicked on the lights in her room and spun around in a circle looking for someone. The sliding closet door was cracked open. I just realized. I thought I could see something through the crack. I squinted my eyes to try and see what it was. It was an eye. I screamed like a child for maybe 2 seconds, followed by Michelle. Relatives ran up into the room as I angrily slid open the closet and pulled out Sam, Tom's son. Tom ran up and found me basically holding Sam by the neck. Sam was holding some belongings of my daughter that I'd rather not talk about. This incident definitely scarred, maybe even ruined my friendship with Tom and his wife, and it's made me that much more protective over my daughter. This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Anthony wanted me to come over for the night since his parents would be gone all weekend. I rode my bike over and put it in his backyard before letting myself in through his back door. We played basically every video game he had, from FIFA all the way to Call of Duty, with popcorn and other junk food spilled out all over the floor. As the night progressed, we moved from video games to watching half a movie and getting bored to doing prank calls at close to 10 o'clock. Anthony made a few calls to different pizza places. When it was my turn, I just dialed a few random numbers in hopes to get someone at their house. On, say, my 4th attempt, I finally reached somebody. A guy with a deep and rough voice picked up, answering with a yeah instead of a hello. Anthony's laughing in the background made me stumble with my words mid-sentence, ultimately cracking up into laughter. I had never done a prank call, so I sucked at it. The guy on the other end was silent. I regained a straight face and tried to continue with the call. It went something like this. Sir, would it be alright if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car? What's your name, kid? My name is Bob. Really? You sure it's not Anthony? It hit me like a brick. I looked up at Anthony, whose face was noticeably full of fear. I hung up the phone, not wanting to be on the line with whoever that was for another second. Anthony, who the hell was that? I asked him. I don't know, he told me. Does your caller ID info display your name or something? No, it shows my dad's name. We hopped on the computer and did some research, trying to figure out how it was possible to get someone's name through their phone number. It didn't make sense how he could get Anthony's name so quickly. He was way too young at the time to be on any of those personal information sharing websites. We ended up asking a question on Yahoo Answers, since no one had a similar experience. The question turned up no answers. I suggested he call his dad, but he said he wasn't supposed to have anybody over for the weekend, so he didn't want to call. We planned on sleeping in the living room, so we just resumed watching the movie that we hadn't finished from earlier. Right after the phone call had left my mind, me and Anthony looked at each other when we heard his front storm door opening, and then the doorknob to the front door began to turn. It only was able to turn about halfway before the lock restricted it. Anthony turned off the TV, and I went over to the window to see who it was. I spread the blinds open. There was a tall guy standing outside. He noticed the blinds moving, and turned to look at me. I practically threw the blinds back into place. Me and Anthony hid in the kitchen, listening for any more noises. We heard the sound of the gate to the backyard opening, as it was right outside the kitchen window. God damn it, I said. I forgot to shut the back door. Anthony urged me to run and shut it. I made it to the hallway leading to his back door, and froze. There was a silhouette standing outside the back door. I don't think he noticed me, but he was surely looking into the house. He opened the door and stepped inside. I tiptoed to the kitchen and motioned for Anthony to follow me upstairs. We made it to his room as quietly as possible, pulling the door shut to avoid making any noise. We crawled under his bed. He had cloth covering the bottom of his bed, so you couldn't see anything under it unless you actually moved the cloth. The doors downstairs all opened, each one getting closer to the stairs. Thumps finally began up the stairs, and he was right outside the door now. The door to the room opened. I could hear Anthony's breathing. It was too loud. Footsteps moved over to the closet, and then the closet opened. I could hear the coat hangers being slid around as the fabric of the jackets and coats rubbed against each other. Footsteps moved over to the bed and stopped. I felt like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. Anthony's breathing was too loud. I had to cover his mouth with my hand. Nothing but silence in the room now. We laid still for so long, I almost thought he wasn't even in the room anymore. I moved my hand away from Anthony's mouth and whispered in his ear, "You think we can make a run for it?" He was about to answer when the most disturbing, memory-haunting scream I'd ever heard filled my ears as Anthony was seemingly dragged out from under the bed. I crawled out and saw him struggling with the man. I desperately looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I settled with the screwdriver sitting on his nightstand. I hurried over to the man and drove the screwdriver into his back. He let go of Anthony as he let out a scream of agony, giving us time to get the hell out of the house. Running onto the road would give away our position too easily. It would take too long to make it to his neighbor's house. We dove for the tree line in the woods and took cover behind a bush, watching the house. The back door opened as the man stepped outside, looking around the backyard. He then looked out to the woods. I felt his eyes pass me as he scanned through the tree line. It seemed that it was too dark for him to see us. Then, he turned his head back in our direction. I ducked behind the bush. "Joe, he's coming." "What?" "Dude, get up, we gotta run." He was right. The man was approaching us fast. How could he have seen us? We ran through the woods with the leaves crunching under us, giving away our position. When Anthony tripped over something, I crouched down with him, hoping we had run far enough. Not even 20 seconds later, oncoming footsteps from the direction we were running from came fast. They slowed down only 2 trees away from us, as we lay face down in the leaves. Moments later, the footsteps take off in another direction. We waited until we could no longer hear them, and took off back in the direction of the house. While running, over the sound of leaves crushing and my heavy breathing, I could swear I heard leaves crushing from behind us. We made it back to his backyard, into his house, and this time remembering to shut the back door. We were now able to call the police. Anthony stayed on the line with them, while I patrolled the back windows, making sure nobody was out there. It was so dark though, I couldn't see anything. So I did something that seems stupid today. I turned on his backyard lights, and immediately in the distance, over by the woods, I saw him, standing in front of a big tree. He turned off back into the woods and disappeared out of sight. That was the last time me or Anthony ever saw him. I would be lying if I told you we heard the occasional knocks at our windows or something cliche. No, that was it. 5 years have passed and nothing has happened. Do I wonder if it was somehow linked to the prank call? Maybe. Does it make sense? Not really. But yeah, this was the story of how me and my still best friend Anthony almost died during a break-in. Me and my wife have had our fair share of arguments, but there was this one night that she wouldn't stop bitching over the stupidest shit. It got to the point where I forgot to put the toilet seat down, and she lectured me at the top of her lungs with an ear-piercing voice that I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my buddy Paul up, and he told me I could crash there for the night. I was exhausted, and I didn't need to deal with my crazy wife at the time. Paul had a huge house, which was another thing my wife always yelled at me about, how all my friends have nicer houses than us. We had a few beers and had a bro chat, He suggested I stay there for as long as I needed, but I assured him I'd only stay for one night. I didn't want to be a bother. I slept in one of his guest bedrooms. Surprisingly, he has 3 guest bedrooms, but has only needed to use one of them so far. He never uses the other 2 bedrooms, and only plans on using them for a party or something like that. All 3 guest bedrooms in the house are lined up next to each other, while Paul's bedroom is across the hall. It's a weird setup for sure, but it let me hear strange noises coming from the next room over. I assumed it was Paul doing something in there, but it quickly got annoying, so I decided to just walk over and see what was going on. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I cracked the door open to Paul's room and asked him what the noise was. He was already in bed as well. He didn't hear anything. Upon asking why he kept the door locked, he told me he always keeps those 2 doors locked as he keeps some personal belongings in there. I warned him that there was a strange noise coming from the room, and he told me to just go back to sleep, and if I continued to hear it, come back to him. So I did. I went back to bed, and the noises were completely gone now. A half hour passed. I was starting to drift off to sleep at last, when I heard the slightest tap on the wall. It came from the other side, the next room over. It was followed by a faint voice. I jolted up from the bed and ran back to Paul's room. This time, he took me seriously. He got the key to the 2 doors and unlocked the one next to mine. We stepped inside and felt a breeze hit us on the way in. The window was completely open, along with the closet. We dug through the entire room. The bed had marks on it as if someone were on it. The closet was full of empty bags, and his valuable belongings that were in his drawers were gone. Paul suddenly ran out to the hallway. I was confused at first, but I caught on quickly as he was checking the other room. I was right by his side as he unlocked the door to the 3rd guest bedroom, and the first thing we saw was a black figure jumping out the window onto the patio roof. Paul was about to jump out after him, but we instead both ran outside through the back door in hopes to catch him. He was gone already. It's a good thing we didn't catch him though, because what we found in this room was far more disturbing. The white sheets on the bed were stained with blood. The closet had the butcher knife he had been missing sitting on the floor with a few blood spots on it. And of course, all of his valuable belongings were gone. These people, most likely homeless and likely dangerous drug addicts, were living in his home for a little more than a week. He had even mentioned something about how fast his food goes, and yet he's so skinny when we were drinking. That made a lot more sense now. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was my first sleepover, an important part of my childhood. It was my good friend. His name was Jordan. We were 10 years old. He had a huge basement where we could play video games until 1 in the morning and then sleep on the couches. Skipping the teeth brushing like 2 little rebels, we went straight to trying to get some sleep on the couches. I fell asleep with ease. I woke up at some unknown time. I realized the TV was still on, with a blank screen. It was giving off a very dim light, but it was enough to notice something in the far corner of the basement, by the stairs. It was some tall object. I didn't know what it was, and I can't really describe how it looked. All I know is it almost reached the ceiling. The sound of the TV turning off and the small amount of light vanishing was almost enough to make me start screaming. I shut my eyes and just laid there motionless. I don't even remember falling back asleep. All I remember is waking up to a sudden and horrid screaming coming from upstairs. It was Jordan's mom. He woke up as well, and we looked at each other before sprinting upstairs to his parents' room. His mom was sitting there crying as his dad was turning the room upside down looking for what she saw. He barged out past us looking for anybody in the house, but there was nobody in the house. No signs of entry or exit. I'm still friends with Jordan today, and the last time I've brought this up, he said his mom doesn't like to talk about it, but she did once admit she saw a tall dark figure standing by their bedroom door. I'm undoubtedly sure that's what I saw in the basement that night.
It was a rainy Thanksgiving. We have a small family, so our family gatherings are tiny. It was my mom, my 2 sisters, our grandparents, and I for dinner at my mom's house. My older sister Nancy has been moved out for years. My younger sister Jamie and I still live at home with our mom. Our grandparents live 20 minutes away. Our dad's side of the family all live in a different town. We were all helping out with cooking and such, and our grandma was bringing over some food as well. We always do Thanksgiving dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. Our grandparents arrived at like 5 o'clock. We had to go out and help them walk through the rain up the front stoop to make sure they didn't slip. It was really bad out. Once they were here, we put the football game on in the living room, and I sat with my grandparents and watched football with my grandpa, who's a big Cowboys fan. My sisters were in the kitchen helping my mom with the food. The rainstorm created for a more comfortable and relaxing Thanksgiving evening. That is, at first. When it was time to set the table, I went to help. We were all at the table by 6 o'clock as per the usual. We had a giant selection of food for the small amount of people we were. Turkey, leg of lamb, potatoes, stuffing, corn, cranberry sauce, cornbread, and more food I'm probably forgetting. We were all at the table eating, drinking wine, and talking before we migrated to the living room, where there we all watched the football game. Then, sometime before the game ended, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside, and we weren't expecting anyone else. Our mom said, "Oh no, what if that's your father?" Long story short, our parents don't speak, but the idea of our father coming to surprise us wasn't impossible. My mom told me to go check who it was, so I went to the door and yelled through it, "Who is it?" But the sound of the pouring rain on the front awning drowned out the sound of a male's voice on the other side. So I opened the door, with the storm door still closed and locked. There was a black man on the other side of the door. He was in some really big rain jacket with the hood up. When I opened the door, he walked closer and yelled something through the door. I had to ask him to repeat it twice before I understood him to be asking for food, saying he's hungry. Then he said something along the lines of, "The Lord will give you good karma if you spare some food." I said 1 second. I went to the living room and told my mom there's a possible homeless or just very hungry man asking for food at the front door. My mom said close the door, while my grandma said give him some food. I said I'll make a little paper plate of food for him from the leftovers. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a bunch of paper plates to account for the rain outside ruining them, and then sandwiched some of the leftovers together with them. Then I went to the front door where the guy was still standing. I held up the plate to show him, and he tried opening the door. I yelled, "Wait, it's locked." But I already was wary now after he tried opening the door. Regrettably, I still unlocked the door, and the second I started to push it open, he pulled it open with force and tried pushing his way through me. I instantly threw the food and held him back, yelling for my sisters to come help me. As Nancy came to help shut the door, I saw 2 more guys rushing up the front walkway to the door. I managed to push the man out enough to clear the door, and I helped my sister slam it shut. The second it was locked, I ran to the backyard door to make sure it was locked. I was the only able-bodied man in the house, and I felt like it was on me to protect the house. My family was in hysterics as we were brainstorming what to do. Not so shockingly, we settled for calling the police. My mom called while I kept going from window to window looking outside. It was hard to see out through the pouring rain, but through the backyard window, I saw a couple men running through the grass to the back door. I'd imagine they tried opening the back door and failed, and then I saw them running through the grass again back to the gate. Then they were gone. When the police got here, the food that I dropped onto the front stoop was still just sitting there, all scattered on the porch. Not that it wasn't obvious that those guys didn't come for the food, but it's something worth mentioning. Our Thanksgiving was almost turned into a complete nightmare if it weren't for my and my sister's quick reactions. I know my grandma had her heart in the right place, wanting to help the seemingly needy, and I was influenced by her. But unfortunately, we live in a world where sometimes trying to do the right thing could bite you in the ass. We installed the doorbell camera soon after this. It was Thanksgiving night. I was over at my parents' house for dinner since they were hosting this year. I got to see some cousins and uncles I hadn't seen in almost a year. We had a typical Thanksgiving gathering for our family. My parents cooked a big meal as usual. Before dinner, though, I got a long essay of a text from some unknown number. I won't share it because it contains a lot of personal revealing details, but it started with, "Hey Melissa, hope your Thanksgiving is going well." Then I quickly came to realize who it was that sent this text. It was this crazy stalker guy named Kevin who I'd never even met before. We matched on a dating app and texted and snapped for a while, but we never met. He gave me obsessive vibes, and when I politely rejected going on a date with him, saying I don't think we have much in common, he got even more obsessive and aggressive. He even threatened me one time when I posted a snap story of my friend and I getting drinks, because he thought I was on a date with a guy. That was when I blocked him on everything, Snapchat, Instagram, and his number, but the contacts didn't stop there. I get random Instagram accounts with 0 followers attempting to follow me, and I block them each time. Same thing on Snapchat, I'd get random accounts adding me with different guys' names every time. Whenever I'd add them back out of curiosity, their snap scores were always 0. After reading the entire message, I was disgusted. He was gaslighting me and borderline threatening me. I replied, "If you keep contacting me, I will go to the police." I took so long to form a reply I was okay with that my grandma got annoyed and asked me to put my phone away. It was only out of sight and out of mind for maybe half an hour before I got another text from another random number. It was another essay. I didn't want to completely ruin my mood and be on my phone dealing with this when I was with family. I put my phone away and just tried to focus on being a part of the conversation. When family started to leave and things started to slow down, I checked the text, and it was disturbing. It was longer than the first one, and it was him berating me and insulting me the entire time, acting like the entitled, narcissistic sociopath that he clearly is. When it was just a small amount of my family left, I showed them the texts, and they were appalled. My mom wanted me to go to the police the next day to report him for harassment, which I planned on doing. I soon left my parents' house to go home to my apartment. My apartment is the lower floor of a 2-family house. My friend Chelsea is my roommate in the apartment. I got home before her, and I went straight to my room to look for Christmas movies to watch. My phone started ringing, and it said unknown caller. I knew it was him. I denied it and silenced my phone. I put on some silly rom-com Christmas movie to fall asleep to. It was called Surviving Christmas. All I remember about it is that it had James Gandolfini in it. It was late at night, so I didn't plan on making it through the movie. I was getting sleepy halfway through the movie when I heard walking from outside my room in the house. It was in the apartment, not from upstairs, so I assumed it was Chelsea getting home from her night with her family. The footsteps came straight to my door. Then someone attempted to open my door. I always lock my bedroom door at night, even though I trust Chelsea. It's just a natural habit I have. I paused the movie and listened as the doorknob turned a few more times. Before I yelled, "Chelsea?" Then it stopped. I heard quiet footsteps walking away from the door. I grabbed my phone, about to call Chelsea, and I saw a bunch of texts on my screen from a third random number. The most alarming one was a threat saying, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." I tried calling Chelsea like 5 times, but she never picked up. I called my parents a bunch of times until my dad picked up, and I whispered into the phone that I think that crazy stalker was in the house. My dad said to stay put. He was coming over right away. We lived 10 minutes away from each other, but he made it to me in 5. That's how fast he drove here. During that time, I stayed on the phone with my dad the whole time until Chelsea called me back, and that's when she told me that she wasn't coming back to the apartment tonight, so it for sure was not her. When my dad got here, the front door was locked. I had to let him in. I swore to him that I wasn't imagining what happened, and so after we tore the place upside down, he went to the big sliding window by the kitchen, big enough that anyone could fit through, and he lifted it open. He turned to me and gave me a stare of disappointment. He scolded me after learning that I didn't lock the windows every night, and said, "Here's my answer on how someone got in here." I went back home with him and slept at home that night. First thing in the morning, my dad took me to the county court's office where they gave us step-by-step instructions for getting a temporary restraining order. Skipping most of the legal process of this story, I eventually did see Kevin in person when I had to go to court to get the restraining order extended. The judge granted the extension, and though I could never prove he broke into my apartment, his threatening texts were plenty, and if he ever contacts me again through any outlets, he'd be arrested. The
This was a truly dangerous man, and I hope he hasn't found anyone else to harass. Most of my family lives in a rural part of Central Florida, closer to the East Coast though. My Uncle Ben was hosting Thanksgiving one year. His house sits on a huge lake with like 5 other houses, that's it. I don't want to give the name of the lake or the town because that would be doxing my uncle basically. It's not a fancy house and setup like you're picturing, trust me. It's rustic, but private and spacious. My uncle is a bit of a redneck, but he makes our holiday gatherings more fun. Him hosting Thanksgiving this year meant that he'd be going all out, making it like a party basically, with music, cornhole, coolers full of beers, and all of that good stuff. We got to his house around 3. During the day, we all drank some beers, ate some snacks like chips and dip, and played drinking games together. Card games, cornhole, and even basketball with my cousin. Though the basketball didn't last long with 3 beers and a bunch of chips in our stomachs. This all went on for a few hours with music blasting. An unusual way of celebrating Thanksgiving, I know. Then as it started getting darker around 5:30, Aunt Mel and Uncle Ben started bringing the food out to the table. They set the table up under the big gazebo. It was around sunset when everything was set up and we were all eating. The gazebo has lights, so when it got really dark, the lights turned on. By 6 o'clock, it was basically pitch black out. My uncle's probably the only one alive who insists on doing Thanksgiving dinner outside, but we all enjoy it. It makes it more fun. The fun soon ended though. My cousin suddenly pointed out past me to the woods, saying, "Dad, who's that?" Uncle Ben turned around and said, "Who the hell?" There was someone standing out in front of the woods like a statue, watching us eat. Uncle Ben stood up and started walking over to the guy standing by the woods, and then he yelled, "Can I help you with something?" I'd say he was about halfway to the woods when the guy turned around and ran into the woods. Uncle Ben turned around and laughed. He was definitely drunk by this point, finding humor in this. He said must be one of the local nuts as he came back to the table to sit. My Aunt Mel was not as amused, and I kind of agreed with her. That was creepy. My dad joked that between all the men here, there's nothing to worry about. The lightheartedness of this did not last though. This time I spotted the guy. He was standing by the woods again, though closer to the lake this time. I pointed it out to everyone. My uncle got up, pissed off this time. He started marching over again, yelling and taunting the guy. His drunkenness was really starting to show now, just in the way he was confronting the trespasser. But then we noticed there was another guy in the woods, on the complete opposite side of the yard. And when the one guy that Uncle Ben was approaching ran into the woods again, the other one stayed put. As Uncle Ben came back to the table, we said there's another one. So my cousin, myself, and my dad all got up now, ready to help my uncle confront these people. And with that, the second guy ran into the woods. By this point, we decided it was time to clean up. We started all cleaning the table and bringing plates and food inside to the kitchen. When everything was cleared out of the gazebo, we all sat inside the living room. Uncle Ben left the lights on outside, because I know he and Aunt Mel were on high alert with people running around their property being creeps. They didn't look like kids, that was the thing. And who would do this on Thanksgiving is the question. Our accepted theory was at the time that it was just some drunk older teens or young 20-year-olds with no family gatherings messing around being assholes. Eventually I wanted to grab another beer, which was in the cooler outside still. As I got up, Uncle Ben and my dad both asked me to grab one too. So I went outside and walked over to the gazebo. I made it to the cooler, suddenly feeling really uneasy. The gazebo light was off now. I looked around, analyzing my surroundings. I grabbed as many beers as I could hold, just so I wouldn't have to come back out here again. Then I started walking back to the house, when I heard one of the chairs under the gazebo sliding on the concrete. I turned around, and there was someone under the gazebo, walking around the table. He looked massively tall, like 6'5". I started yelling for Uncle Ben as I ran back to the house. He, along with my dad, came out, and I said there's a guy over there. And then, as if someone else was responding to me saying that,
There was a banging from the other side of the house, like someone was hitting the siding with their hand. Seeing my uncle and my dad genuinely frightened made me frightened too. We went inside, and Uncle Ben locked the door. We didn't know how many people were outside of the house, but we felt like the house was surrounded. And Aunt Mel started shutting every last curtain and blind in the house because we felt like we were being watched from the outside. Uncle Ben called the police, which was a first. It felt completely out of character for him to involve the police in anything. He was only on the phone with them for like 5 to 10 minutes. Then we waited in the living room, with clear tensions and unease in the room. There was this quick and sudden loud bang on the glass, followed by a window in the kitchen completely shattering. Aunt Mel yelled at Uncle Ben to go get the old rifle from the closet. He yelled back the thing hadn't been loaded in years. Luckily, the police response time was pretty good. A singular beep of the siren from the police car outside let us know he arrived. One of the people outside had thrown a brick through the window with a note attached to it, saying, "Leave now, you fucking fits," which felt like a threat. His Trump flag was also missing the next day, which created the possibility of those people's motives being political. That's really the most realistic theory, because unless my aunt, uncle, and cousin are secretly the worst neighbors ever, I see no other reason why their house would be a target for something like this. On Thanksgiving, nonetheless. There really are some sickos out there. When I was a really little kid, this local small amusement park that used to be open by us would hold this annual event called Pumpkin Land, which was held on the Saturday before Halloween, where candies would be given out to kids in between rides, and pumpkins would be scattered throughout the park for families to pick up and take home before leaving. I always looked forward to it, and this one particular year when I was 7, we were going right after my soccer game. The park also rewarded kids for coming in costumes, so I was going in my cliche Scream costume. Anyway, my parents took my 2 siblings and I, and when we got there, my brothers begged to go on the haunted house ride first, and then the roller coasters. Basically, they wanted to do the most thrilling rides first. Anyway, my mom and 2 brothers got in one of the cars for the haunted house ride. Since they only seated 4, my dad stayed with me on the line so we could ride together. And I think as I started to get cold feet, I felt like I needed to use the bathroom. So we got off the line, and my dad led us to the bathroom. He went too, but I finished first, so I waited outside the bathroom. I waited for a while. I was kind of confused. Eventually I went back to the bathroom, and my dad wasn't in there. That's when I started to panic. I was alone in a huge crowd of people, and at 7 years old I was actually scared of being lost. Eventually a man came up to me and asked where my parents were. I told him I couldn't find my dad, and I asked him for help. He took my hand and said, "We're gonna go find them." I remember him leading me with a tight grip of my hand, and suddenly he pulled out his archaic Nokia brick cell phone and started talking to someone on the other end. The only major thing I remember him saying was, "Oh, I'm with him right now," as he looked down at me and smiled. Then he said, "Okay," and hung up. He looked at me again and said that was my dad, and that he was waiting by the parking lot. He continued to lead me. But even at 7 years old, I wasn't an idiot. I was wise to the fact that my dad did not have a cell phone, and that this stranger probably didn't know my dad. How would he even know who I was if I was under a Scream mask? As we were approaching the front gate to the park, I spotted a female employee and started saying "excuse me" over and over until I got her attention. Then I said, "I don't know him, please help." The man defended himself, saying he knew my dad and was trying to get me to him. But the employee took my side and asked me to come stand by her so she could use the loudspeaker to find my parents. The man didn't stay a second longer after that. He walked away quickly into the parking lot. The employee announced over the park intercoms that a child in a Scream costume was missing his parents and gave my name. Eventually my dad came running over waving his hands. He was a nervous wreck. The employee told him of the potential predator and the possible attempted kidnapping, and that's when he lost it. When my mom came over, she was just as furious. My parents asked the manager to see the surveillance footage. Somehow at that time, the amusement park didn't have any surveillance cameras, according to the manager. Still, my parents thanked that employee for getting me away from that man, and we tried to have a normal day after that. I was too young to realize the severity of the potential situation I had just avoided. Obviously, remembering it as an adult is a lot more sickening to think about. When my mom and stepdad went on their honeymoon, I wasn't trusted to watch the house for the week, so they sent me to my Uncle Ronnie's farm. He lives with my Aunt Susie and my cousin Ronnie Jr. They have a spare bedroom upstairs that I stayed in. It's an old-fashioned style wooden farmhouse. It's big and nice though. The spare bedroom overlooked the crops and the numerous scarecrows my uncle had scattered through the crops. This was in mid-October a few years ago, and my uncle was mid-harvesting his corn at this time of the month. He asked for my and Junior's help. Weirdly, it wasn't tedious work, like I kind of enjoyed doing it. He wasn't using his combine. Instead, we were just hand-picking a bunch of corn. I had this little rolling basket-like thing that I was supposed to fill up. I admired the 3 scarecrows he had. They looked like he put a lot of work into them. They had sweatpants on and varying flannels, along with straw hats over their heads. When we were done picking the corn, I asked Uncle Ronnie how long it took to make those. He said a few hours at most, and he said they really do the trick keeping the crows away for the most part. That night after dinner, I played video games and smoked weed with Junior for a little bit. Then I just went to the guest room to do whatever on my laptop. Next thing I knew, a rock or something hit the window. It scared me for sure, as there's no way that wasn't intentional. I didn't want to go look out the window to check though. I just closed my laptop screen so there would be total darkness in the room. I crossed my fingers it wouldn't happen again, but when a second rock hit the window, my heart felt like it dropped out of an airplane. The room was still completely dark, so I gave it a minute before getting up to peek out the window. There was a full moon out, and one of the outside lights was on, both lighting up a decent amount of the crops and one of the scarecrows. I continued to look around, but when I saw something moving in the corner of my eye, I looked back at the scarecrow to see one of its arms waving at me. No, surely I was hallucinating. The waving stopped, and the arm moved back down to its side. I shut the blind and wanted to throw up. I ran to Junior's room and opened the door, but by this point in the night, he was already asleep. I closed his door and checked downstairs for my aunt and uncle, but all the lights were off downstairs, so I checked their bedroom, and they too were both asleep. I went back to my room and lifted the blind just enough to peek out there. The light outside was now off, but with the bright moonlight, I was able to see the scarecrow was still hung up on the stick. I looked out that window for over a minute, waiting for it to move again, but the longer I waited, the more I realized I must have been higher than I realized. I finally dropped the blind back down and climbed into bed. The next morning, I went downstairs to my Aunt Susie making us all pancakes. My uncle was already outside doing work. Aunt Susie called Junior down to eat before all the pancakes were gone, and around that same time, my uncle stormed into the house asking, "Where did the goddamn scarecrows go?" My heart dropped. The 3 of us went outside, my uncle leading us to show us that all 3 scarecrows were missing from their posts. That's when I told him about what I saw last night, and how at first I thought I just imagined it, but now it made sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that somebody did in fact throw rocks in my window. They did see me looking out, and someone was posing as a scarecrow. That night when we were all sleeping, the doorbell rang continuously at like 1 or 2 in the morning. I heard my uncle and Junior yelling in the hallway and running down the stairs, so I followed. When he opened the front door, the 3 scarecrows were posted up right in front of the porch, all with red paint stains covering them, mimicking blood. My uncle called the police and turned on all the outside lights on the property. The police, as well as my uncle, chalked it up to some stupid early Halloween prank by a bunch of immature kids. But the possibility that it wasn't, and that it may have been a much more hostile motive behind this, is what really freaked me out. It was November, All the leaves were varying shades of yellow and orange, my favorite time of year to visit the countryside. I was with my girlfriend at her dad's upstate home, which was usually used as a summer home, but the two of us came up there to go camping in the nearby woods. The home had all the needed camping supplies, including the tent, so we parked there and took the camping stuff into the woods. Why? Just the experience of camping and sleeping in the woods, I guess. I've only been camping a few times in my life, but I liked camping in the fall because there's less bugs and of course you can't beat the foliage. We were camped out in a small circular clearing, just big enough for our tent and campfire. We sat around the fire for about an hour, eating and just talking. Then we went inside the tent. We kept the fire going as it made my girlfriend feel safer, and it added a bit of warmth. Besides the sound of the crackling fire, we eventually started hearing leaves crunching in the distance. My girlfriend and I looked at each other. She put her finger up to her lip. I could tell she was nervous. Fires usually repel wildlife from approaching, so as the crunching of the leaves got louder, it got more suspicious. The footsteps also sounded bipedal, like a human's footsteps. The crunches got louder until they stopped around the fire. Then we noticed the shadow outline of someone standing out there, and then they sat down on one of the chairs, but they didn't say a word. So I finally decided I was going to peek my head out and check. I looked out to the campfire, expecting to see someone sitting on one of the chairs, but there was no one out there. I got up on my legs to look around the campsite, into the trees and darkness. I didn't see anyone out there. My girlfriend was whispering something. It sounded like she was urgently trying to get my attention. So I crawled back inside, and she said, "What does he want?" I replied, "There's no one there." She replied, "What are you talking about? I see him in the chair right now." I looked at the wall of the tent and saw the shadow outline of the person still sitting in the chair by the fire. I realized that was impossible, though. I crawled back out of the tent to look one more time, and both the chairs were still empty. I went back inside and said to my girlfriend, "We need to go right now." She didn't ask questions. She got straight up, took my hand, and followed me out of the tent. When she saw there was no one sitting in the chair, she screamed. I yelled at her to shut up, and I led us through the near total darkness in the direction back to the mobile home. While running, we heard this horrible groaning sound not too far away from us, and one single loud crash of a tree branch or something. This caused both of us to scream, "Oh shit," and run even faster. How we found the property was by repeatedly pressing the car lock button until we finally heard the car horn. We went into the mobile home, locked the door, and hid under the covers in the safety of the bedroom. Still, I didn't feel entirely safe being surrounded by nothing but woods in every direction, and I was paranoid that whatever was out there followed us. I let my girlfriend sleep while I stayed up listening for sounds. I thought I heard a clicking or something from the front door to the home, but that might have been my paranoia playing tricks on me. I fell asleep eventually, and when we woke up, we went back for the tent and supplies, scared shitless while doing so. Nothing was moved except for the one chair we thought we saw the shadow sitting in. It was knocked over. We hurried back to the car, drove home, and that was our last camping adventure.
My cousin Tyler and I used to have sleepovers all the time when we were kids. Always at his house though, because he had the cool house. Back then, before cell phones and modern video games, kids actually used to do normal kid things, like for example, we both loved to play hide and seek at night. One time when we were 9, both our parents were going out for a night in Atlantic City, so they had my other cousin, Tyler's older brother Joe, keep watch on us. An hour into the night, however, Joe told both of us he was going out and not to tell Mom. Tyler and Joe would commonly do this because it mutually benefited them. Tyler loved having the house to himself, and Joe hated staying home all night. By the time he left, it was already a little later in the night, like 9 o'clock. We had our dinners and decided it would be a good idea to play hide and seek.
Their house was honestly massive, so it was always a lot of fun. I was hiding first. We started in the basement where Tyler would count. We had a rule that we couldn't use any house lights, only flashlights. Our reason for this was because it just made it cooler. I tiptoed up the stairs, then up the next flight of stairs to the upstairs of the house. The upstairs had a whole other living area, along with 3 bedrooms. I chose to hide in one of the unused bedrooms. I buried myself between 2 big beanbag chairs and a blanket. I left the door open to avoid any suspicions. I heard creaking coming into the room, lively footsteps. Tyler was now moving around the carpeted room. I could hear him. He went over to the closet and opened it. Then he opened the second closet. Silence. Then he walked over to the other side of the room, and he started opening the drawers to the desk, rummaging through them. Suddenly I heard Tyler's young, innocent voice calling my name up the stairs in a kind of mockingly tone to try and scare me. My mouth opened and literally started twitching when I put 2 and 2 together. I lifted the blanket slightly over my head to see what he was doing, but it wasn't Tyler. I knew right away based off the person's height. It was a much taller, fully grown man. It wasn't Joe, and it wasn't his dad. He perked up like a statue when he heard Tyler's voice, and I saw him duck into the corner of the room, behind the small piece of wall that sticks out there. Tyler entered the room with his flashlight and kept saying my name over and over, slow and drawn out like. I was praying his light would not reach over to the corner of the room. His light landed on me under the blanket. He may not have even seen me, but I still willingly came out and acted all defeated, fake laughing and everything. I told him he won, put my arm around his back, and started nudging him out of the room. I kept the conversation as natural as possible, until we were halfway down the stairs. That's when I dropped the bomb and told him there was someone in there with me and nudged him to run outside. Being the scared 9-year-olds we were, all we could do was run next door and ask the woman living there to call the police for us. She did without hesitation. I still remember the scene vividly, of the cops pulling up, running into the house, and 5 minutes later ushering a guy out in cuffs. It was a great feeling, even as a 9-year-old. One time I had a sleepover with my friend Mike on a cloudy, dark night. There was a slight drizzle and occasional lightning. We were 13 years old. Mike lived on a dead end with one other house next to it. Across the street was a field surrounded by trees, and his backyard led to a forest. Mike and I were up late, much after his dad went to sleep. His dad's room was all the way upstairs. Mike's room was on the lower level of the house by the den, so the den was where we would hang out mostly to just play GameCube. A knock at the backyard window interrupted our game. The blind was shut, so we couldn't see outside. Mike ran to go open the blind. I told him not to, but he did anyway. As he did, I shut off the TV and lamps because I didn't want to be seen. Now that it was dark in the den and slightly brighter outside, we could slightly see outside and see that there was nothing but grass in the visible distance. A small flash of lightning confirmed that there was nothing but wet grass in all directions. We sat in the den with the lights off for a while, just waiting for something else to happen. We kept our eyes on the window, expecting somebody to come up to it. Eventually, after what felt like forever later, we turned the TV and lamp back on and pretended it didn't happen. The blinds were open this time, and every so often I'd take nervous glances at the window, just making sure nobody was out there. After getting so absorbed in the game and forgetting to take a glance at the window, there was the second set of knocks. Mike and I both jumped up and looked at each other. With all the lights on, we couldn't really see outside. At least, not until the flash of lightning outside, just for a brief moment, lit up the night sky, long enough to show the person who was standing at the window. This time we ran upstairs to Mike's dad's room and pulled him out of bed, screaming at him to get up. The three of us ran out to the backyard in our coats and shoes, turning the backyard light on the way and also taking along flashlights. There was a buildup of mud next to the back wall of the house where the dirt patches were, and in the puddles of mud were heavy, distinct footprints of boots. We followed the footprints as far as we could, but as the mud faded away, so did the footprints. We searched high and low for anybody. We even went around front and then out into the woods. There was nobody. We all went to sleep, Mike and I in the den. I couldn't sleep though, I was terrified. Of course, the blinds were shut to the window and back door now. Just as I was anticipating it, there was a third set of knocks at exactly 12:15. I remember that number. Me and Mike both jumped from the couches and ran upstairs to his dad's room once again. This time he ran outside alone and told us to call the cops. He returned soaking wet, having found nobody. The cops came for nothing because there was really nothing they could do. The knocking didn't happen again though, and I also never slept over Mike's house again. Ever since that day, his den just always gave me the creeps. I used to be close friends with a kid named Chris. He moved away across the state when I was 8. Since we never got to see each other anymore, I got my mom to agree to drive me all the way over to Chris's new house in the country for a weekend sleepover. Pulling onto his property, I already knew this was the perfect place to do anything outdoorsy. It was a decent-sized house with nothing but woods in all directions. The first day we didn't do much because I got there late anyway, so we just talked for a while and watched a movie. A couple of times I'd think that I was hearing sounds coming from below the floor. I would ask him, "Do you have a basement? Is someone down there?" Chris went on to tell me that there was no basement and that his whole family had been hearing weird noises coming from down there for a few days, and they planned on having some inspector over to check it out. The next day was partly cloudy and warm, so we planned on spending most of the day outside. I convinced him to go for a walk in the woods just to explore. After all, this was all kind of new to him as well. Conveniently, there was an opening into the woods that almost seemed to have meant to be a path. So as we were walking over to it, Chris's foot hit something that made a metallic kind of thud sound. His foot hit a rusty old cellar door. He said he didn't know about this, neither did his dad. He bent down and pulled it open, and it made an ear-piercing squeal as the rusty door turned on the hinges. It was the definition of pitch black down there, but it seemed a ladder led down a very narrow tunnel. Neither of us dared to step foot down there. Suddenly, a sound echoed up the tunnel, like the sound of something dropping onto a hard floor. And then metallic sounds echoing up the tunnel, getting closer. As soon as we realized it was the sound of somebody climbing up the ladder, we ran to get Chris's father, who was shocked to see what we had found. He called down there repeatedly for anybody to come out before calling a few of his buddies over to go down with him. Chris and I were forced to stay inside while the three of them went down there. They came back up 5 minutes later, all of them visibly shaken and nervous. They came back inside and talked to Chris's mom in private. They never let either of us in on what they saw. Apparently cops showed up as well, but we were forced to stay in Chris's room, so we couldn't watch any of it. In fact, it wasn't until I was 13 did Chris finally text me one day, telling me what his dad really found down there. 3 full body bags tucked away in a corner, an old cot, broken beer bottles everywhere, and the smell of freshly smoked pot. Chris told me that when we heard something down there, we probably heard whoever was living down there, and whoever was responsible for those dead bodies.
I am 14 and my friend is 15. One night my friend asked me if I wanted to spend the night, so I did. His mom was at work and his dad was at the gym. Me and my friend were upstairs in his room playing video games. We kept hearing what sounded like scratching noises and slight banging. We thought nothing of it because he has a dog, so we kept playing our video game. Minutes later we heard the noises again, but they were louder, and so we went to go see if it was the dog. It couldn't be the dog because it was lying outside his parents' room. Fearing someone was trying to break in, we grabbed our knives and flashlights. We searched all the rooms upstairs, then went downstairs searching it with only our flashlights. We decided it would be best to search his backyard, although we don't know how someone would get in his backyard because it's fenced in and there's a deep drop-off on the other side of the fence at the back. The search came up empty. I convinced my friend we should search the front of his house and make our way around his fence. We went around front and he went left and I went right. On the right his fence connects to his neighbor's, so I went over to him to find him frozen with his light shined in the direction of the woods near the drop-off. I was weirded out and shined my light in the direction of his to find a guy dressed from head to toe in all black, frozen and staring at us. At this moment, I yelled "run" and we bolted inside the house and called 911. We waited, and minutes later 2 officers arrived to find nothing, and they told us to call them again if anything happens. Me and my friend were instructed by his parents to stay inside and downstairs in case anything happens, so we did. About an hour later, me and him were sitting downstairs on the couch, and he out of nowhere asked, "Did you see that?" "See what?" He then said, "The light. Someone shined a light through the window over the fence." About a second after he said that, I saw a beam of light shine through the window. So we called 911 once again, and the officers showed up minutes later and yet again found nothing. Me and my friend at this point were paranoid and waited until his dad showed up, and we took him outside to the backyard where we all heard footsteps. His dad convinced us that it was just a hunter, so we went to bed with no more problems. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. My friend asked me about 2 weeks later if I wanted to spend the night again, and I did. Later that night, his parents were both still at work. We were joking around about what had happened with what we thought was the hunter, as his dog was outside doing its business. While we were talking, I peeked out the back door to check on his dog to find what looked to be someone peeking over the fence, so we immediately called his dog in and locked the door. We left it alone, and minutes later, as we were in his room, we heard noises, so I looked out his window to once again see what looked like a guy peeking over the fence. So we grabbed knives and flashlights once again and went in the backyard and shined the flashlight in the direction we thought we saw the person. The light illuminated the outline of a head at the area of the fence we thought we saw the guy. We ran inside and called 911 and they responded. Minutes later they showed up and again found nothing and sat at the area outside the fence near the woods for 5 minutes in case something happened. Nothing happened, so they left, and they told us to call back if anything happened. We didn't tell his parents this time because we thought they wouldn't believe us. Me and my friend returned upstairs to his room, and about 2 hours later, we heard the loudest banging ever. It started from the downstairs on the left side and went to the front door. We freaked out, we grabbed the dog and barricaded ourselves in his parents' room and got his dad's gun out in case we needed it. We then called 911, and again the police showed up and found no one and no sign of anyone and left. That was the last time we ever had that problem, and it still has us scared to this day. I was 14 years old, hanging out with my friend Jesse, who was also 14. We were in the living room playing Call of Duty. His parents weren't home for the night, so we were being as loud as we wanted. We were doing nothing but playing video games and eating junk food all night, and eventually, since his parents weren't home, he convinced me to just stay over for the night. So after Jesse went upstairs to go to the bathroom, I went downstairs to call my mom in private and tell her I would be staying over. By the time I got back upstairs, Jesse was back, and he just stared at me with a confused look on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he thought that I was upstairs as he thought he heard someone in the bedroom next to the bathroom. I assured him I was downstairs making a phone call, and he just looked back upstairs with a concerned look. He walked upstairs and I followed him. He stopped at the door to the bedroom and put his ear up against it. He then opened the door and peeked into the room. It was dark, but I could see there was enough light in there to be able to scan the room. We didn't see anything, so he shut the door. I told him he was being paranoid as we went back downstairs to play more video games. We turned the volume back up loud and resumed playing. After the match ended, the loading screen came up, along with the silence that usually accompanies loading screens. That's when me and Jesse both looked at each other. Jesse hit the mute button as we listened to what we were sure was somebody grunting from upstairs in that bedroom. But soon after the silence from the television, there was silence from upstairs as well. Jesse whispered to me that someone is hiding up there. They must have stopped making the noise as soon as there was silence down here. Jesse whispered to me that we need to leave through the back door right now as it was much quieter than the front door. I agreed, and we headed outside to the back door. As soon as we were outside, Jesse got on the phone with the police as I looked up to the bedroom window. For some stupid reason, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and aimed it up to the window. About 3 seconds later, my heart dropped as someone stepped into view from behind the glass, but only for a brief moment. They seemed to crouch down under the window after spotting us. Jesse saw it too. That's when we actually took off down the block. We only came back when we saw a police car parked outside with its lights on. Jesse unlocked the front door for the 2 cops and they went inside to investigate. As me and Jesse were outside waiting by the car, we saw him. Him, as in the guy who was surely at the window. He was coming out from the backyard, walking really fast, yet also clearly trying to keep quiet. This man was really tall, like 6'5" or something, and he looked to be mid-40s. Me and Jesse ran inside and screamed for the cops to come outside, but by that time he was gone, and we had no idea which direction he could have gone in. Inside of the bedroom that the man was in, a giant clothes bag had been pulled out from under the bed with certain articles of clothing obviously missing. There was also money missing from the desk drawer, and the desktop computer had been turned on. We never saw or heard of this man again. This took place in the summer of 2008 when I was 12 years old. I was sleeping over at my friend Calvin's house. I can't remember every little detail about what was going on, but I remember Calvin's family came home unexpectedly early, and things were getting a bit hectic in the house. So we came up with this cute little idea of pitching a tent up in the backyard and sleeping out there for fun. We figured why not since it was warm out anyway. We pitched the tent in like 15 minutes with Calvin's backyard nightlight giving us enough light in the dark. Now on one side of Calvin's backyard beyond the fence was about 100 yards of nothing but trees. We lived in the country in New Jersey. Anyway, after goofing around for a while, Calvin turned off the nightlight and we finally went to sleep. Now I don't know about everyone else, but I cannot for the life of me fall asleep in sleeping bags or let alone anything but my bed. I was twisting and turning for like 3 hours trying to fall asleep in that thing. Sometime during the night, I started to hear a little rattly, creaky type sound coming from around the fence. It gave me chills at first, naturally. I wanted to wake Calvin up, but I didn't. It sounded like the wooden fence was being pushed or was just moving. It was a bit windy out after all, but still, nevertheless, being the only one awake outside in a pretty rural area, and hearing a weird sound would make anyone uneasy. I tried to ignore it for the longest time, rolling around for like 3 hours hearing nothing but the sound of the wind, to then hearing a constant strange sound was just too weird, and I was getting downright freaked out. I felt the urge to pee coming on, and I didn't really want to go out there without knowing Calvin was awake. So I woke him up and told him to listen to that noise. Of course he thought it was just the wind, but as long as he was awake, I did feel better about leaving the tent. I unzipped the tent and naturally looked in the direction of the noise. I couldn't really see anything, it was too dark, so I walked over and flicked on the nightlight switch. When I looked at the fence, I saw there was a person leaning on the fence with his head down, seemingly pushing the fence. I immediately turned the light off and practically dove into the tent. I whispered to Calvin what I saw, and as we both fell silent, we realized that the noise had stopped. I told Calvin to call his house phone as quietly as possible, but he said we should run straight for the back door. I agreed. He unzipped the tent as quietly as possible and opened the little door, and when he ran out of the tent, he screamed. In reaction, I jumped out from the tent and ran straight for the back door as well, not looking behind me. When I asked Calvin why he screamed like that, his response scared me. He told me he saw somebody standing right by the side of the tent in arm's reach. The rest of the night we slept in Calvin's room upstairs, and I could swear, with the window open, I could still hear the creaky fence being pushed, but every time I looked, I couldn't see anyone out there.
My family and I are probably the biggest skeptics in the world, which is why I can't explain what happened that day. I went downstairs and my brother was in the kitchen. I grabbed a water and asked him if he believed in ghosts. He shook his head, but told me a story about something that he thinks may seem paranormal. Then I looked at him and asked, "Did you ever try to scare me when I came home from school?" I planned on asking that question to follow with my story. "Once," he said. Somehow that calmed me down, and I wasn't going to bring anything else up because I thought it was some kind of closure. He continued by saying, "But all I did was shoot a Nerf gun bullet at you while you were on the computer." I wish he didn't say that. That wasn't what happened to me in the 7th grade. I do remember him shooting a Nerf gun at me, but it felt inferior to what I was about to tell him. I continued to speak with him about the story that follows. It happened in middle school when I was in 7th grade and recently started off the new year. I came home that day and went to my bedroom where I sat in my bed and put in earbuds to watch YouTube videos. My mom had called me to tell me that my brother would be gone or would be leaving soon to go to a friend's house. My parents also worked late, which means I would be home alone. I was a very quiet kid when no one was around because I always had this fear that there could be someone in the house with me. If I didn't make much noise, then they couldn't find me, right? Who knew that suspicion could have possibly been true? I paused my YouTube video and headed to the bathroom. My house has a very weird layout. I'll try to explain what the important parts of this story looked like. If you were in my bathroom facing the door, you could step out and take a left, and my brother's room would be to your right at the end of the hallway, which is a short hallway. If you went right, you would reach the stairway that went down and stopped because there was a platform in the middle, and then you would walk in the same direction you came to get lower. The stairway leads to our main entrance of the house. We also have an alarm activated. If any doors or windows are opened, a box will immediately say which door has been used. I was in the bathroom and right about to flush the toilet when I heard a loud thud come from my brother's room. I assumed that he must be about to leave for his friend's house, so I flushed the toilet and got up to wash my hands. There were no more noises. The house felt still, but I felt like I was being listened to. I turned off the sink and walked over to the bathroom door to lock it. Something felt wrong. My stomach started to ache from fear. I felt like I was just being paranoid, but I also couldn't shake that weird feeling in my gut. So I waited for another noise. I didn't have my phone on me, so I couldn't text my brother. We had a house phone in there, but it made loud noises when you dialed, so I didn't want to risk it. Then I heard talking, which was definitely coming from my brother's room, but that was not my brother talking, and it couldn't have been my dad. The muttering was deep and low. It sent shivers down my spine. I could tell it was a voice because of the distinction of an S or a T, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. Then there was a slow pounding noise that started getting closer to me. It came out of my brother's room and nailed its way towards the bathroom door. It stopped dead in its tracks right at the door. I threw myself away from the door near the window, hoping that if it busted in, I could get away to leave. I couldn't fight whoever it was since I was a weak 7th grader, so that was out of the question. I covered my mouth to keep from breathing loudly in case they didn't know I was in the bathroom. Then they continued to walk. I could hear them making their way to the stairway, and then it stopped. I heard a loud crashing noise from what I thought was the middle platform of the stairs, and then again at the bottom. Then the muttering stopped, and the loud pounding made its way to the door. I heard the door open and close, and I heard the alarm go off for the door as well. I didn't know if it was safe or not, so I made my way to the door and rested my hand on the doorknob, still covering my mouth. To the left of me towards the ground is a laundry chute that led to our laundry room. If someone were to get from the main floor to the laundry room, it would definitely take over 30 seconds. But about 10 seconds after the door opened and closed, a vicious, jabbing noise pounded at the small laundry chute door. I stood there in awe, not sure what to do. It sounded like someone took the end of a broom and reached up there to stab at the door. I watched as the pounding of the door vibrated the small laundry chute door, hoping that it wouldn't bust open. Then it ended. I waited in the bathroom for what seemed like an eternity, and then quietly crept to my room to call my parents. No one picked up, so I waited for them to get home and held my door handle to make sure no one could get in, since I didn't have a lock on it. When my parents got home, they didn't believe me. Soon after, my brother arrived, and he doubted me as well. Telling this again to my brother made his mouth drop. He continued to tell me that he used to hear things come from the attic that used to open up in his bedroom. I will honestly never forget that day. Me and my brother can't figure out who or what that was, and I try not to think too hard about it either. I still don't quite know what happened, and I may never know, but I want to. My name's Alyssa. I was 16 years old at the time, living with my mom in a crappy Bronx, New York apartment. Living in the Bronx was definitely an experience, not a good one. Always sketchy characters around, usually scary to walk alone at night, small apartment, and creepy neighbors. I don't mean that as an understatement. Our apartment was the second to last one in a hall on the 7th floor, and our neighbor, the owner of the last apartment in the hall, seemed to always be sitting outside his door, sitting on the windowsill. He would always make a point of looking at me when I entered the apartment, even when I would be with my mom. My mom told me to stay away from that man. We never even knew his name. He was a black man in his 60s, very little hair left, but his remaining hair was gray. He always had the same emotionless expression on his face when he looked at me. And then one day, it started. Every time I would see him in the hall, he would say hi to me, but he'd call me by my name to make it even creepier. I wasn't exactly sure how he got my name, but I never asked. There was one night that my mom was working the night shift, so I'd be home alone all night. I came home at like 9 p.m., and the neighbor was as usual sitting on that windowsill as if he didn't have anything going on in his life. As I unlocked the door, this time instead of saying hi to me, he asked me if my mom was working tonight. Here's where I look back and cringe because of my own stupidity, because I foolishly nodded yes. He didn't say anything after that. He just slowly nodded his head. I didn't say anything else either. I simply walked inside and shut the door. I had enough of his creepy ass for one night. Basically, after getting home, I just washed up a little bit. I had a snack, did laundry, and took a shower. As I was in the shower, I heard a weird rumbling noise. It was a pretty concerning noise, but I couldn't even begin to try and pin out what it could have been. I got out of the shower after hearing it because I was concerned someone might have been in the apartment. I heard a similar noise outside of the bathroom. It seemed to come from my bedroom. I threw on the clothes I had in the bathroom and searched my entire room. I couldn't find a person, but while searching my room, I saw an ever so tiny hole in the wall. I got closer to feel it and look at it. Then I got down on my knees to look through it, and when I saw what was on the other side, I fell backwards because of how scared I was of what I saw. It was someone's eye. Someone was actually looking through that hole from the other side. Then I realized this wall separated our apartment from the creepy neighbor's apartment. Then I had a sudden realization of what that sound I heard in the bathroom must have been. I ran back to the shower and felt all around the wall until I found another hole, identical in size from the one in my room. The neighbor drilled these 2 holes, maybe even more, to spy on me. I called my mom and told her, and as I was on the phone with her, there were knocks on the apartment door. It was the neighbor, and he kept yelling, "Open the door right now, I didn't drill those holes." My mom freaked out and told me to call the cops, and she'd try to get home ASAP. One good thing about the Bronx, police response time is fast, and there were cops at my apartment door in under 5 minutes. My mom was home half an hour later. My mom pressed charges for stalking, invasion of privacy, and criminal mischief. The apartment building also evicted the man and patched up the holes at the man's expense. I'll never forget the time my friend Hal and I went camping. Hal is an Eagle Scout and nature lover, so he's always going out on these camping trips. One time I decided to come along and see what it was about. He went with his at-the-time girlfriend Maya. I received a last-minute invitation. We carpooled together and arrived to the destination 3 hours later. Hal doesn't believe in going to campsites because it doesn't give the real camping experience when you're surrounded by other people, so he took us to some random dirt trail off some dead road that he seemed to know about. He drove down this dirt road in the woods for a couple minutes until he seemed to be content with where we were. Then he put the car in park. It was such an inconspicuous place to stop that I wasn't even aware at first that we were getting out there. Hal unloaded the trunk. Most of the stuff we brought consisted of tents, sleeping bags, food, toilet paper, and first aid equipment. Hal said he usually packed a lot lighter, but was making this an easy trip for Maya and I, whatever that meant. Once we found a good place to set up camp, Hal basically assigned us tasks. Setting up a tent was one thing I knew how to do, so Hal told me to set up the 2 tents. Maya stayed behind with me and kind of helped with the tents, while also unpacking some of the supplies. Hal went off to find dry firewood. He would come back every so often with a couple pieces of wood. Nightfall came quicker than expected. Thankfully, Hal had collected enough wood by then to start a nice fire, and the tents were pitched. We sat by the fire, drinking and reminiscing about old memories, most of which Maya was not in the picture for. I imagine she got tired of hearing our drunken, nonsensical stories because she went to her tent before Hal and I. So, Hal and I stayed up for a little while longer, now being a bit quieter and keeping the laughter to a minimum as a courtesy to Maya. I finished my last beer, and I was definitely feeling it by then. We chatted for a bit more, until Hal told me to shh and listened. I heard it too. There was walking out in the distance, beyond the area at which the fire lit up. Hal assured me it was likely a deer. When I naively asked what if it's a bear, he reassured me that a bear would not come this close to a campfire or the sound of people. I asked him if he was sure about that. He didn't answer though. The footsteps seemed to be going in circles, getting ever so slightly louder with each passing minute. When the footsteps got close enough, we started to hear a disturbing noise. It was like a clicking, growling type of noise. "Is that a wolf?" I whispered. Hal didn't answer. He just motioned for me to get into the tent. I did what he said. I got into the tent that I pitched for myself, and I believe Hal got into the tent that I pitched for he and Maya. The clicking noise outside was getting more and more clear, and it increasingly became obvious it was not the sound of a wolf, or a bear, or any kind of animal I could imagine. It didn't even sound like something of this planet. The light from the fire outside cast an eerie glow onto the walls of the tent, and I had to cover my mouth so that I wouldn't scream when I saw the shadow on the tent walls of some horrific, huge, bipedal thing walking past my tent. The footsteps were so slow, but so heavy. It moved away from my tent towards the direction of Hal and Maya's tent. The next thing I remember, besides waiting in absolute horror, was Maya's scream. She screamed as if something were about to kill her. I didn't know what was happening, but I heard Hal screaming outside, "Run," over and over. I heard the two of them hurrying away outside, so I rushed outside and followed. We ran in the pitch black, no flashlights, nothing, and yet we still knew we were being chased by something. Footsteps followed close behind me since I was in the back. By some miracle, Hal managed to lead us right to the car, and without looking back, we all got into our respective seats, and Hal floored it down the trail. Hal drove down the dirt trail for about half a minute before we came to a dead end. He had to somehow turn this pickup truck around now, in this dark forest, not too far from where we were being chased. I urged him to turn off the lights so that whatever was chasing us wouldn't see us. He insisted he needed the lights on though so that he wouldn't hit any trees trying to turn the truck around. He shifted from drive to reverse, over and over. Meanwhile, I sat in the back seat biting my nails and clenching my teeth, looking around the woods outside, terrified that I might see that thing from our campsite. At long last, Hal got the truck completely turned around, and he once again stepped on it to get us out of that forest. We left everything at that campsite, at least $100 worth of equipment, but there was zero chance of us ever going back there. What caused Maya to scream was heavy breathing and something pushing into their tent, trying to rip it open. Hal still says he's never heard or seen anything like that in his life. He still has no idea what it could have been, but it definitely walked on two legs. How do we know it wasn't a person, you might ask? Simply because of its size and the noises it made. I think everyone has one truly horrific, unexplainable experience in their lives, and this was ours.
When I was a kid, before we lived in Texas, we lived in a home that had this huge backyard in Georgia that made me feel like the most popular kid in class. Anytime playing outdoor games or sports was ever an idea, my backyard would be the spot to go since we had a 2-acre backyard. The backyard was surrounded by woods on 3 sides. It also had many trees throughout the yard, a trampoline in one corner, a hot tub, a big detached 3-car garage, and an above-ground pool. For a middle-class area, we really had everything you could want in a backyard. There was enough open grass to play any sports, soccer, baseball, football, anything. We even played hide-and-seek tag, or manhunt as we would call it. One Friday when we were in like 6th grade, my friends and I wanted to have a camp-out sleepover in my backyard. It was Mike, other Mike, who I'll call Michael, and Jason. We all had to get our parents' permissions, of course, but we were like 11 or 12 and it was a Friday. None of our parents had any reason to say no. Plus, my family has lots of camping equipment, including 2 tents that could easily fit 2 of us in each one. After all of us got permission from our parents, we made arrangements for them to get to my house around 5 so we could play sports in the backyard. We had 2 mini soccer nets in the yard that we used to play soccer 2-on-2. We did that for like half an hour. Then we played baseball for another maybe half hour. And after just sitting around for a few minutes regaining our energy, my parents ordered pizza for us, so we ate around 6:30 or 7 if I had to guess. The sun was starting to go down a little bit now, so now came the time to set up the tents before it was too dark. I was pretty good with setting up tents because I was a Boy Scout and we just recently learned how to set up tents. My friends kind of helped, but I did most of the work. By the time they were done, it was decently dark out. The backyard lights were on, giving a nice glow. It was now dark enough for us to play our favorite game, Manhunt. There were a million spots to hide in the backyard. We played in pairs. It was Mike and I hiding first, and Michael and Jason would be hunting. Mike and I split up. Our goal was to get back to the home base point, which was the back door to the house. No camping by the door was allowed. The trampoline was in a far corner of the yard before the woods. I crawled under that to hide. When the hunters would start looking, they had to blow a whistle to let the hiders know they were starting. Once I heard the whistle, I stayed under the trampoline waiting it out, watching the 2 of them in the distance looking around. I was waiting for a good moment to creep closer to the back door.
I had my sights on the hot tub, which was right next to the house. If I could make it over to hide behind the hot tub, I could straight line beeline it to the back door. So when both Michael and Jason had their backs to me looking in different areas of the backyard, I sprinted towards the hot tub, and just as I got right behind it and ducked down, I heard one of the trash bins on the side of the house almost topple over, and then I noticed the motion detecting light on the side turn on. The hot tub was by that corner of the house, but it wouldn't have triggered that light. I went to peer around the corner to the side yard, and I saw a tall person dressed in dark clothes speed walking away in the direction of the woods before entering the woods. It wasn't my dad. I ran to my friends and called the game off, then went to tell my dad about it. We came out and looked around the woods for a few minutes, and then checked the street for any unusual cars. Nothing and nothing. He said we should sleep inside tonight, which obviously bummed us out. We went inside and just played a game on my PlayStation. I again described to my friends what I saw, just some tall guy walking into the woods on the side of the house after apparently almost knocking over one of our trash bins. We talked about just going back outside and sleeping in the tents since they were already set up anyway. And plus, what were the odds whoever that was still out there hours later? After we finished playing our game, we went back outside quietly to not wake my dad up. It's not like we were hiding the fact that we were going back out there, but we didn't want to advertise it either. We each had a sleeping bag. Mike and I shared a tent, while Michael and Jason shared the other. After a while of joking around and yelling things between tents, we started to quiet down and try to go to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet, but it seemed like Mike was. I started hearing walking sounds in the grass nearby, approaching the tent, and then the zipper to the tent was unzipped, and I looked up and saw my dad looking inside the tent. He said, "What are you guys doing out here?" I replied to him something like, "They wanted to sleep out here, so we came back out." Then I took a closer look at the face peering into the tent. I realized it wasn't my dad, but some complete stranger who looked to be my dad's age. It looked like he was about to come in when I screamed bloody murder like a little girl. Everyone woke up, and Mike started to scream as well. The man grabbed our ankles and said to be quiet, but he gave up when he realized he was about to be exposed. He left the tent and disappeared. I told my friends to run inside the house, and as we were running to the house, my dad was already coming out the back door in response to our screams. I told him I don't know which way he went, but that the man from before was back. My dad ran around the yard, screaming and taunting the creep to come back if he has any balls. We heard it from inside the living room. My mom called the police, of course, and all that really happened when the police officer showed up was he took my recount of what happened, and I'm sure he made a police report, then left. It was good to have a police report at least, so that the cops would be aware of a creep going around. I'm not sure if that man ever came back to our property or not, or if he ever got in trouble for something similar. Either way, it was pretty traumatizing, and it could have gone much worse. This was back a few years, sometime in 2019. I was at a friend's house. I'll call her M for the sake of the story. I was pretty excited for this sleepover. I couldn't wait to talk about all the middle school drama. Now, something you might want to know is M's house was deep in the woods. I mean deep. Anywhere you looked, there was woods, and their nearest neighbor was about a half-mile away, but on the backside of her house was a cliff that led down to the ocean. The night at M's house started off pretty good. Our friend Sam was there too. We played Truth or Dare, Hide and Seek, and other teenage games. It was getting pretty late, but we decided to go on a walk down the gravel road that led to the other houses along the way. We asked her mom, and she said yes, so we started walking. After another 10 to 15 minutes, we saw a man who was walking on the other side of the street towards us. At first, we weren't thinking much. Maybe this dude was just taking an evening walk as well. But something that didn't seem right was that this man was wearing pretty thick clothing. I'm talking, it almost looked like snow gear, and not to mention it was pretty warm out. At that moment, it was like 60 degrees outside. We all looked at each other as we passed the guy, and that's when it hit us. The stench, the disgusting smell coming off that guy. It was absolutely horrible. Words could not describe how disgusting that smell was. It was so bad that after we finally got a few feet away, my friend took a deep breath, almost like she had been holding it. One of my friends ran into the woods and almost threw up. At this point, we felt it was best to head back. Our friend who almost threw up was begging to go back anyway. We all agreed that it would be the best idea to head back. On our way back, we passed him again. This time we held our breath before we passed him, but when we looked back, we realized he was no longer walking in the opposite direction, but instead he was following us. This was really annoying. That disgusting smelling man was now bringing his stench even closer. We had no choice but to speed up our pace. We started speed walking. We still had about a mile to make it back to M's house. As we began to speed up, so did the random disgusting smelling dude. We all looked at each other, scared and annoyed. We picked up our pace even more, almost to the point where we were jogging, but of course, the man sped up even more. Now at this point, we were running, and my friend Sam looked back, and then we heard it. Sam let out a blood-curdling scream as she looked back, which caused Em and I to look back as well. And what we saw, still to this day, absolutely horrifies me. This man was full-on sprinting at us. He had what looked like a knife or something sharp in his grasp. Em, Sam, and I started screaming as we were sprinting down the road. Our screams caused him to stop chasing us, and he eventually just stopped. But he didn't move. He just stood still, watching as we left. We didn't stay around to see what his intentions were. We just ran straight back to Em's house. Once we got back, we slammed the door and decided on not telling her parents, as they were already asleep. We all went to the living room to finish setting up our sleeping areas. A few hours passed. It was about 2 a.m. at this point. We were watching something. I can't remember what, but I know it was some horror movie. Now, I mentioned her house was on a cliff for a reason. Because of this, her house has a lot of windows on the backside overlooking the view. I was sitting on one of the couches that was set up right at the window. It was pitch black outside. All you could hear was the waves and occasional wind. All of a sudden, I heard footsteps outside. They sounded like they were right by the window. I told my friends, and Em said it was probably the deer that always comes by. For 2 years now, Em had been feeding this deer, who always came up to this very window. I got pretty excited, as this meant this deer would come right up to my hand. I decided to look out the window, and I didn't see anything. It was too dark. I said that we should go outside to pet the deer, but Em and Sam said no. They reminded me about what happened earlier, and I agreed. So we went back to watching the movie. Another hour passed, and we were all feeling tired. We turned off the TV and headed under our blankets. It was about 45 minutes later. Em and Sam were fast asleep, but I felt like I couldn't rest. Something was up. I had this gut feeling that told me not to go to sleep, so I decided to look outside. The moon was just bright enough that you could see the ocean, so I spent a few minutes just staring outside. As I was staring outside, my eye caught something moving in the woods over to the left. I turned my head that way, but I saw nothing. I knew I saw something moving, so I grabbed a flashlight that was on the bookshelf and I pointed it in the direction of where I saw the movement. Now this was probably the worst idea I could have ever had, because when I did so, I saw that man again, but this time he didn't have any snow gear on. Instead, he was completely shirtless, and I wasn't about to find out what else he didn't have on, so I tried to wake up Em and Sam and tell them what I saw. Sam woke up, but Em was a deep sleeper. I told Sam to look outside, but when we looked, he was gone. Sam looked at me with a pretty angry expression, like I was just messing with her. I told her I wasn't, but she didn't believe me. She went back to bed, and I was left laying there. It was now about 4:30 in the morning. It was still dark outside. I didn't sleep at all. I felt myself drifting off to sleep when I heard a knock on the door. I almost jumped off the couch when I heard it. I knew I shouldn't open it, but my curiosity got the best of me. I walked over to the door and looked out of the peephole, and again I saw nothing. My head had to be playing with me. I again went back to the couch and threw my blanket over my head. I eventually fell asleep, but woke up at around 5 a.m. in a cold sweat. Something wasn't right again. My body wouldn't stop shaking. And then it hit me. That familiar stench. That disgusting smell. I almost threw up right there. But as fast as I sat up, I heard footsteps coming towards me and I screamed. I flicked on the flashlight, and as I did, I saw him, the man from earlier, standing in the corner of the room. My scream woke up Em and Sam, and they screamed too. And as we did this, the man bolted out of the house. Em's mom and dad came running down the stairs, and after a few minutes, we told them everything that happened. Em's mom called the cops, while Em's dad walked down the road with a shotgun, seeing if he could find the man. After that, once the police arrived and got all of our stories, I went home. My parents didn't tell me much when I got home. They hugged me for what felt like hours. And from that moment, I wasn't allowed at sleepovers anymore. Only now, years later, did I finally realize just how bad everything was. The police eventually found the guy, and inside that old shed we were daring each other to go into were 5 dead bodies. And that stench that was on that man's body was the smell of decaying flesh. And if things didn't go the way they went, in the end, my friends and I would have ended up in that shed. I work in risk management for a big bank in Manhattan. I've met a lot of cool people through this job. I go out to happy hour all the time with my coworkers. In 2019, a new guy named Sebastian was transferred to our office. I met him on his first day in the office. He seemed very sociable and talkative, and he'd always be laughing and smiling. He went out to happy hour with us that Friday, and he truly was the life of the party. Always talking about all of his experiences, all the places he's been and things he's done. There was not a dull moment with him. Eventually, Sebastian and I became friendly, and we went out together once in a while on weekends. I came to realize the more I got to know him that a lot of what he said may have been fabrications. His stories about all these beautiful women he allegedly got with, all these stories of hanging with celebrities. I started to just take everything that he said with a grain of salt. But I kept hanging with him because he was just easy to hang out with and kind of funny. Sebastian one day invited me to go with him and his sister to their condo in St. Pete Beach, Florida. His mom is very wealthy, owning a place in Beverly Hills, Colorado, and St. Pete. She wouldn't be at the condo this particular weekend, so Sebastian said it would be fun. I invited my little brother to come along too. We all took the same flight. I met Sebastian's sister at the airport. She seemed pretty interesting. Hard to explain, but she was a bit quirky. The condo was actually decently nice. It had 3 bedrooms. I'd never been in a condo with 3 bedrooms before. Sebastian and his sister took a room each, so my brother Tyler and I shared a room. I told him if we meet any girls, he's sleeping on the couch though. Since we landed late, it was past beach hour. We went out to some beach bars which were pretty cool. It was a bit of an older crowd. Sebastian was getting really drunk really fast though for some reason. It was a chill vibe. I wasn't sure why he was downing shots. I had to tell him to slow down when he started getting aggressive with people. This was the first time I'd seen him like this. He was also going up to every last girl he saw and drunkenly hitting on them. And 9 times out of 10, the girls seemed uncomfortable. Tyler and I laughed until it wasn't funny anymore, and it was more so embarrassing being seen with him. At one point, a bigger guy got in his face for talking to his girl, and I had to pull Sebastian away and apologize to the guy to de-escalate things. As we walked away, Sebastian pushed me and called me a piece of shit for not having his back. Tyler and I told him to just calm down. Even his sister was telling him to relax. Sebastian stormed off, I'm assuming back to the condo. His sister didn't say anything and just followed. This was an extremely bizarre start to the weekend. Tyler and I stayed and finished our drinks. These girls even came up to us and asked how we knew him, making a joke of it. We actually got their numbers. They were visiting too. They said they're going downtown later if we wanted to meet up, and we said we were down. So after that, I texted Sebastian asking where they went, and he texted back immediately that they went back to the condo. Tyler and I walked back to the condo and let ourselves in. We expected Sebastian to be angry, but instead, the second we walked in, he jumped off the couch all excited like, with a big smile on his face, saying, "Are we going out tonight or what?" He was still definitely really drunk. I told him, yeah, we should chill out here for a bit first though. Then I told him about the girls' numbers we got. Sebastian asked how many girls, and I said 2. His smile disappeared. Then Tyler, for some reason, told him that the girls came up to us after he left, asking how we knew you. I think he was saying it as a joke, kind of trying to playfully rip on him a bit, which was a mistake. Sebastian stormed away into his room and literally slammed the door shut. I was realizing he must be extremely bipolar or something. I was getting off vibes now, from both of them. I whispered to his sister, "Is he always like this?" And she replied, "Like what?" in a very standoffish way. "Never mind," I said. This was extremely uncomfortable. I was hoping maybe Sebastian would sober up and tomorrow would be better. Tyler and I chilled in our room for a little while. Sebastian never came out. I went over and knocked on the door and asked if he wanted to come out with us. He didn't answer. So we eventually Ubered without them to meet those two girls at some big clubby bar. As I was getting drunker, Sebastian started blowing up my phone with things like, "Where are you? How could you just leave me here? Your stuff is going in the street. Don't come back. I don't know why I invited you here." I showed Tyler and the girls, and everyone was concerned. Something was wrong with Sebastian, and he was showing it now. As much fun as we were having with the girls, we had to Uber back to the condo before Sebastian really did something stupid. When we got back, Sebastian was just sitting on the couch alone, looking at the wall. I asked if he was okay. He looked at me, then looked away and said, "Yeah, hope you had fun." Then he got up and went to his room and shut the door. Whatever. We went to bed. Tyler and I just stayed up talking to each other for like half an hour, about Sebastian and about life in general. Then suddenly, we heard footsteps on the wood floor outside. We stopped talking. The footsteps came over to the door, then stopped. We both heard it. I spoke up to Tyler on the top bunk, whispering that Sebastian is right outside the door. He whispered back, "I know." He must have had his ear up to the door or something, listening to us. We didn't say a word. A literal 5 minutes go by before we heard his footsteps walk away from the door. Then we heard him talking outside. He was laughing and saying stuff, but we didn't hear his sister saying anything. I wanted to see who he was talking to, so I crept over to the door and opened it. I looked into the living room, which was dark, but I saw Sebastian in the corner leaning on the wall with one hand and his head down. He was laughing and talking to himself. I heard him say, "Joe is always such a stupid bitch," and then he laughed again. "My name is Joe." I closed the door quietly and went back to the bottom bunk. I whispered to Tyler what I just saw, and his response was simply, "What the fuck?" I told him we should leave tomorrow morning and get a hotel, and he agreed. We tried to go to sleep, but the talking and laughing outside went on for another 10 to 15 minutes. When it finally stopped, we heard the footsteps come outside the door again, stop for a minute, then go to his room, and then we heard his door shut. Finally, we felt comfortable going to sleep. By now, I was shot. I fell asleep pretty quickly. But I woke up probably only 20 minutes later. I sat up, knowing something woke me up. I looked at the door, and in front of it was Sebastian standing there. I jumped and said, "Yo, what are you doing?" He then lunged at the bed, screaming, trying to apparently strangle me, yelling, "You're a piece of shit." Tyler had to grab him off of me and throw him into the corner of the room. Sebastian yelled, "You suck, Joe. I invited you here just for you to shit on my life and talk shit about me to my sister." I, of course, tried to calm him down and rationalize, but there was no rationalizing with crazy. We packed our shit and called an Uber to a hotel, where we stayed until Sunday, then flew home. I saw Sebastian in the office the following few weeks, but he always avoided talking to me or looking at me, and he eventually transferred to a different office, probably because of me. Sebastian seemed cool and normal at first, but he was an example of a very sick, damaged person deep down. And that night we spent in his condo absolutely terrified me. Thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. Check the links below.
Ages ago, when I was a boy, one of my favorite things to do would be to have sleepovers with my friends, especially my friend Joe. Joe had the coolest house layout. It was big and it had this huge basement with a pool table, air hockey table, and the entire basement looped around in a big circle. And we'd often ride his scooters around the loop in the basement while on our sugar rushes after hours of playing video games and eating junk food. The best part was his parents could never hear us down there, as they slept all the way upstairs. I'll never forget the night that my mom dropped me off at Joe's house after dinner. It was the night before a holiday, so we didn't have school the next day. Joe and I went straight to the basement and started playing one of his new video games on his PlayStation 1, when suddenly the door to the laundry room in the back creaked open. We paused the game and turned around to look, and yes, the door was now cracked open. I told Joe to go check it out. He said it's fine, it happens sometimes. To be honest though, sometimes at night alone in his basement, Joe and I would get spooked.
I told him to go shut the door because something about having that door open leading into a big pitch black laundry room was uncomfortable. I think he agreed because he got up to close it. After a while of playing video games, I started riding Joe's bike around the loop of the basement, which honestly was a lot more fun than it sounds. But then something else happened. There was a noise, almost like the sound of a laundry machine door being banged or closed. It came from the laundry room again, obviously. This time Joe and I ran up the stairs freaked out, and Joe called his dad to come check the laundry room. His dad opened the door to the laundry room, had a quick 5-second look, and calmly said there's no one in there. So he went back upstairs to bed, and Joe and I continued to hang out for another hour or two. Then it came time to go to sleep. There were 2 couches down there, one in front of the TV, and then another towards the back of the basement by the bar. I slept on the couch towards the back of the basement. I didn't sleep long though. I woke up and it was still pitch black in the basement. No light shining through the small basement windows. It was still the middle of the night. I rubbed my eyes and sat up after getting this weird feeling of being watched. "Joe?" I said, just checking if he was awake. After saying his name, I heard and saw something moving in the darkness to the laundry room. And then the door creaked shut. I jumped off the couch to wake up Joe, but when I got to his couch, he wasn't there. That's when I became wise to what was going on. Joe was trying to scare me. I tiptoed to the door of the laundry room. I figured I would reverse it on him and scare him instead. I put my hand on the doorknob, and after a little mental buildup, I yanked the door open and went inside screaming. I turned on the light to the room, but Joe wasn't in there. Where could he be hiding? In that moment, I was beyond confused. I knew he had to be in the room. Then I noticed something through the glass of the dryer machine. I walked over to it and knelt down. Someone was in the dryer machine, crunched up and like a ball. You know how dryer machine doors usually have a sort of tinted glass that's hard to see through? Well, while I knew there was a person in there, it took me a few seconds to catch on that the person that was in the dryer machine looking back at me was not Joe. It was some grown man. I started screaming and ran all the way upstairs to Joe's parents' room. Everyone in the house came out from their bedrooms in response, including Joe. Joe apparently was having a hard time falling asleep on the couch, so he went upstairs to his bedroom. I yelled there was someone hiding in the dryer machine. As Joe's dad started his way storming to the basement, somebody ran through the living room and out the front door. Joe's mom let out a scream as his dad ran outside in his slippers to try to catch the man. Of course, being that he was only in slippers, he didn't have a chance. When he came back, Joe's mom had already called the cops. When the cops came, they asked me if there was anything specific that I could make out about the man. All I could say was that he was wearing dark clothes. Joe and I slept in his room. I slept on the floor with a blanket, and we kept the door locked. We took a break from the sleepovers for a while after that. This happened quite some time ago. In fact, it happened back in July 2013. It was my 13th birthday party, and my friends and I had been to Manchester for the day, before heading back to my house for a sleepover. A couple of them had stayed over before, but some hadn't, so I wanted to make a good impression. We all decided to sleep downstairs that night, as there wasn't enough room in my bedroom. We gathered our sleeping bags on the living room floor, watched cheesy rom-coms, and ate junk food until around 1 a.m. So we decided to hit the sack after our third movie. We turned off the lights with the exception of one, as although we didn't like to admit it then, we were a little afraid of the dark. It's a common thing to lie awake and chat at a sleepover after you say you're going to sleep. We were in the middle of whispering to each other who we thought our celebrity lookalikes were, when we heard it. A loud knock on our window cut through our conversation. "What was that?" said Emma, one of my friends. "It's probably just my dad playing a prank or something," I said. Although this whole situation was kind of freaking me out, my dad had done this type of thing before, so I assumed it must have been him. We were beginning to calm down when suddenly another forceful knock came upon the window. This made some of my friends scream. I assured everyone that, like I said, it was probably just my dad being goofy. So I went over to the window to catch him red-handed. The curtains were closed, so I had to pull a section of them back to see who was outside. As I did, I came face to face with a man who was most certainly not my dad. This man was bald with very thin eyebrows, and he had a missing tooth. He was sort of hunched over, and he looked at me with widened, glassy eyes. I immediately screamed and closed the curtain. At this point, my friends and I were pretty hysterical, and Emma began visibly shaking in fear. My parents were upstairs, so instinctively, I ran up to find them. As I got upstairs, my mom was talking to someone from her window. I didn't quite catch their conversation, but she told me what happened soon after. She said that she heard the knocking too, and when she looked out of her window to see who it was, the man looked up and asked her if she had seen a friend of his. I can't remember the name of the guy she said she was looking for, so we'll call him Paul. He kept asking for him over and over. "Have you seen Paul? Where is Paul? Has Paul been here?" Of course, my mom said she didn't know anyone named Paul. Eventually, she had to ask him to leave us alone, as he just kept wandering around our driveway. As the man finally left, I went back downstairs to calm my friends down. In retrospect, I feel bad for leaving them alone down there when some weird stranger was on our property. We all settled back down after that. However, my mom's maternal instincts kicked in, so she wanted to make sure he was gone completely. She left briefly to go around the block in her car to make sure he wasn't still in the area. The street was dimly lit by impractical streetlights, so she had to put her high beams on. As she was driving, she saw someone dash across the middle of the road. Thinking it was just a kid, she just kept driving until the man who was at our window appeared again. But this time, he practically jumped in front of my mom's car. My mom quickly slammed on the brakes, but before she could confront him, he disappeared off into the night. We never found out who that guy was or what his true intentions were, and thankfully, we never saw him again. So much for wanting to make a good impression. My friend Jake slept over at my house one night when we were 12, and because of that, he may have possibly saved my life. It was a snowy weekend night. We watched a couple Christmas movies in my living room. My mom would bring us snacks and hot cocoa. She was always really nice to my friends when I had them over. My mom had to go to sleep kind of early because she worked. She and my dad had just recently divorced. By around 12, Jake and I went to my room, where we played Pokemon on our Game Boy Advances for a little. I don't remember much after that, besides falling asleep a little while later. I woke up in my bed to the room being extremely cold, and also feeling really thirsty. I went to the kitchen downstairs to get a cup of water. I noticed how much colder it had become upstairs as opposed to downstairs. I went back to my bed and tucked myself in. As I lay there trying to fall back asleep, I realized Jake was breathing weird, like a deeper, heavier breathing. It went on for some time, and after making a note of it in my head, it was all I could focus on, so I eventually threw a pillow at him. As he woke up, I told him to stop breathing so loud. He was confused as he looked up at me in my bed. He said, "What are you talking about?" I told him to just lower the volume of his breathing noises, as he was borderline snoring. Jake shifted his focus from me to down below my bed, and then he screamed. He crawled backwards until his back was pushing up against my dresser. I yelled, "What is it?" I hopped off my bed and looked under it where he was staring at. There was a middle-aged man with long hair laying underneath my bed, and he had his finger up to his lips saying, "Shh." It was a surreal sight to say the least. I felt like my heart was beating 200 beats per minute. The man whispered, "I know your mom. I'm here to see her." He started crawling out from under the bed. At that same moment, Jake and I ran from the room, screaming for my mom. We got to my mom's room and locked her bedroom door behind us. She was immediately distressed and confused by our screams. I barely had enough time to yell, "There's a man under my bed," before the doorknob to my mom's room started twisting and shaking. Then the sounds of the doorknob failing to turn shifted to heavy, aggressive bangs at the door. My mom ran to her phone and called 911. She was on the phone already in tears, while also screaming at the man on the other side of the door to leave us alone. The man tried kicking the door in, but I think when he heard my mom on the phone, he left the house. We were all in shock. It took the police only a couple minutes to arrive, at which point the coast was clear. The biggest window in our house, which was the window to the upstairs spare bedroom, was lifted up completely, which explained the cool air entering the house upstairs. That also explained the man's point of entry. I told my mom that man claimed he knew her, but she had no idea who this man could have been. My mom dropped Jake off home, and then she and I slept at my aunt and uncle's house for the rest of the night. The next day, my uncle installed a stronger lock on that upstairs window. This was like 16 years ago now. At this point, it's just a distant, haunting memory. But we never figured out who that man could have been, or how he could have possibly known my mother. I was house sitting for my grandma one weekend while she went to Florida with some of her church friends. I was sleeping in the guest bedroom next to her room. The guest bedroom always had 2 twin beds inside of it that my brother and I would sleep in when we had sleepovers at her house. I took the bed next to the window, but before getting into bed, I checked all the doors making sure they were locked. When I did get into bed, it was early, and I didn't actually go to sleep for a while. There wasn't much to do at my grandma's house. I was just on my phone for an hour or two, watching videos, texting people, whatever. That's when I thought I could start hearing someone's voice outside. It sounded like a woman's voice, saying hello. I left the bedroom and inched my way closer to the front door, moving slow because I was trying to listen.
Hello?
It was a woman's voice, just going hello like every 10 seconds. As I got closer to the front door, I realized that's where it seemed to be coming from. My grandma's door doesn't have a peephole, but the windows in her dining room gave a clear view of the front porch, so I went over to that window to attempt to get a view of who was out there. I tried peeking my head in between the plastic blinds without making it obvious, but I guess I didn't do a good job of that, because when I looked, I did see a woman on my grandma's stoop, and she was looking right at me, as if she knew I was going to be looking through those blinds. Once again, she said hello, with some freakish smile on her face. This woman was older, but don't picture her as some innocent-looking, small old lady. She looked like she was maybe late 50s, early 60s, and something about her face just skeeved me out. I moved away from the window and thought maybe it was one of my grandma's friends. It was midnight, though. Why would anyone come to the door this late? And why wouldn't she knock or ring the bell? Why was she just standing out there going hello over and over? I was genuinely unsettled. I just went back to the guest bedroom and shut the door. Now with the door shut as opposed to before, I couldn't hear that woman anymore. Maybe it was that, or she just decided to leave. I started texting everyone about it, my sisters, my friends, telling them how bizarre it was. But a good amount of time passed in silence, and I was starting to calm down. My sisters were telling me to call Grandma, but there was a 0% chance she was awake, and she barely ever even checked her cell phone anyway. Just like that, something broke the silence. A banging at the window. Not a knocking or tapping, banging. I felt that fierce pain in my chest area as my body entered that fight or flight mode. Shortly after the banging stopped, I heard that familiar voice say hello. With that boost of adrenaline, I guess I had the extra confidence to grab the blind and push it up. There I was, face to face with this horrifying older lady, with only a thin layer of glass between us. I screamed at her smiling, gross face, "I'm calling the cops." I pulled the blind back down and ran back outside to the living room. I looked around the house, then ran upstairs to box myself into the upstairs guest bedroom. I didn't want to actually call the cops. I don't know why. I wanted to just wait it out. I crawled into the bed in the upstairs guest bedroom and tucked myself under the covers. A couple hours later, I was still awake, and I finally only then went back downstairs to look outside each window. That freaky old lady seemed to be gone. The next morning, I called my grandma and told her what happened. She started yelling into the phone, clearly panicking and distressed. She told me how a few days earlier, she was being watched in the grocery store by some woman about 10 years younger than her, who just kept smiling at her for no reason. I told her to calm down. I didn't entirely know whether to correlate the two or not, but when we eventually got off the phone with each other, I did have to give it a second thought. My grandma is 75, and she has lost a bit of her wits, so I do have to take some of the things she says with a grain of salt. But the way she yelled into the phone about the woman in the store really gave me the chills, and I still wonder if it could have been the same person. My name is Nicholas. I'm currently a freshman at Syracuse University, which doesn't exactly sit in the safest area. I just went through a breakup with my first girlfriend, so I started getting back into the online dating scene. I was using the app Hinge when I found some blonde girl named Stephanie who I really connected with. She also went to Syracuse. We both liked to read, go to the movies, we even had the same sense of humor. I suggested we go on a movie date, and she said she'd love to. She told me to meet her at some specific point near campus and she'd pick me up. So, around 9 o'clock, I waited on some corner of a normal neighborhood block, waiting for Stephanie. She asked me to share my location with her, and so I did. A few minutes later, I saw a car turn down the street and start approaching me. Then it stopped in front of me, and the driver rolled down the window. It wasn't Stephanie though, but some old random guy. He asked what I was doing alone out here, which was insanely weird first of all. Then I said I was waiting for someone. He asked if I was waiting for Stephanie, and I said, yeah, how'd you know? He said he was Stephanie's father, and told me to hop in so he could give me a ride to her. I took a good look at him, and he looked a little old to be her father, to be honest. I'm no idiot when it comes to sketchy situations, so I said in a firm voice, why didn't you tell me you'd be picking me up? He claimed he didn't trust a random guy meeting up with his daughter, and wanted to meet me first. I took another good look at the man and didn't say anything. I simply started walking away in the opposite direction from where his car was facing. He started yelling, hey, hey, sounding surprised that I was just walking away like that, but I've heard way too many kidnapping stories to know where this could potentially go. I heard the guy's car moving, and I turned to make sure he wasn't doing a U-turn to follow me. I breathed a sigh of relief when he drove straight and turned left out of sight. I continued walking down the block towards campus. I got to the corner of the block and was just about to make a turn when I noticed what I was pretty sure to be the same car the man was driving, just parked on the side of the road with the light shut off. I briefly tried looking into the window as I passed, but the glass was tinted. I tried not making it obvious that I was suspicious and continued walking. I got a text from this so-called Stephanie person saying, why didn't you get in the car with my dad? I ignored the text and continued walking. I kept looking back to see if the car would move. When I got to an intersection in the road, I turned right and then full-on booked it in the direction of campus. Surprisingly, I wasn't followed. I made it back to campus out of breath and started walking to my dorm building. I felt like I heard footsteps following me though. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but when I heard a piece of broken glass being kicked by someone's shoe, I knew I was being tailed. I made a point of ducking down behind a van and stopping to give me time to listen for where their footsteps were coming. They were a few cars away from me. Then I remembered. I never stopped sharing my location with Stephanie, or should I say that man. I saw him. It was that old man. He was approaching from between two cars across from me. He yelled something that I didn't fully understand, but it sounded like he said, "Come back and I'll take you to her." He had to be like 60-something. There's no way he would catch me if I sprinted. I lost him easily when I ran, and made it back to my dorm room. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one to talk to about it. But when I lay in my bed, I got another text from that man, and it was shocking. It said, "You're a little piece of fucking shit. You're lucky you got away. I would have strangled your ugly ass." I still have the screenshot. I replied saying thanks for the threat, it's going straight to the police, and I blocked his number. I still have the conversation saved as evidence, and I plan on going to the police with it eventually. Hopefully they are able to do something about it. When I was 18, I had a side job as a part-time janitor at my high school over the summer. I would work sometimes days and sometimes nights, anywhere from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m., depending on how much money I needed. Oftentimes, I would be left to lock up the building when the older janitors have left. This was a time before the high school had cameras installed in every single hallway. So one night, one of my superiors, Tom, had to leave early, meaning I'd be finishing up the rest of my shift alone, and I'd be locking up for the night. He told me text him if I need anything, as he always did, and then he left. I loved it when I was left alone because usually I'd just do half an hour of work and then just hang around on my phone or leave early and still get paid for the whole shift. I definitely pushed it with the things I'd get away with at that place. One of the things Tom asked me to do before leaving was bring all the extra seats in the gymnasium from the assembly down to the basement storage room. So I figured I'd do that, then just go home. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and started carrying it down to the basement. The lights in the storage room were very dim. They kind of suck. The whole basement of that school wasn't exactly pretty. It felt more like a basement to a warehouse. Anyway, there were what appeared to be a bunch of art mannequins covered by paint cloths. You know, those big things that look like blankets. It seemed all of the school's art supplies were stored down here. I dropped a stack of chairs down where the rest of the chairs were stored, then went back up to the gym to get more. When I came back down with more chairs, I noticed one of the mannequins was exposed now. The blanket was removed from on top of it. I know for sure it was covered minutes earlier because it was one of the front ones. I texted Tom saying, "I think someone's down in the basement." He said back, "What do you mean?" And I said one of the art cloths were moved. He took a minute to respond saying no one else should be there. Then I noticed something. The art cloth, tucked in the corner of the storage room, sitting outside of the light that was produced at the center of the room. It was covering something, surely. I started to tiptoe over to it, but when I was a few feet away from it, I realized whatever was under that cloth was moving just ever so slightly. There was undoubtedly someone hiding under there. I ran back upstairs and locked the basement door. I texted Tom saying someone is hiding under a cloth in the basement. He said call the cops, but I insisted he just come back since he only just left like 10 minutes ago. He didn't want to come back though. He told me to be a man and confront whoever was down there. So I went down to the basement again. However, the cloth was now strewn flat on the floor, and whoever was hiding under there was gone. But possibly the scariest thing was yet to happen. As I stood in the storage room, there were loud metallic thumps coming from above my head. I looked up and saw an indent slowly forming in the large air vent above me. Someone was crawling through the main vent, then just stopped literally above me. And then, bangs. Bangs like whoever was in there was trying to break open the floor of the air vent. I didn't know what was happening, but I was officially done with this. I ran up the stairs, locked up the school, and went home. I told Tom the partial truth the next day, that I thought I saw someone in the corner and it was gone when I went back. Then I claimed there was nothing else I could say. Thank God it was my last week there, so it wasn't my concern anymore. My aunt and uncle live in Fort Myers, Florida. Every winter we visit them for a weekend just to see them and escape the cold. This has been a long-time tradition, dating back to when they first moved there, about 15 years ago. So we'd been doing this almost as long as I could remember. This happened back when I was 12. My cousin Ashley, who was a year older than me, would always be there, of course, so the two of us would hang out a lot during these visits. She was cool to hang out with, and I related to her a lot, even though I was a young boy and she's a girl. She'd always be down to do the cool stuff that I'd normally do with my friends at that age. After the family dinner on the first night there, we all watched a movie together. After the movie, our parents hung out with each other in the kitchen drinking wine. They wouldn't let Ashley and I go out that late, as we were only 12 and 13, but Ashley wanted to go to a nearby canal where locals were apparently reporting having seen a 10-foot-long alligator. Basically, we both wanted to go see if we could find the gator after she convinced me. We snuck out through the back door while our parents were still in the kitchen. On our way to the canal, we stopped at the 7-Eleven on the street so we could get some snacks on the way. The cashier already told us to be careful out there, implying it was late for us to be out. The streets were deserted at this hour. The area of Fort Myers in which they live is on the significantly quieter side. We walked for like 10 minutes, and the closer we got to this canal she kept talking about, the swampier the sides of the road started to get. Ashley froze in front of me and looked straight ahead. She pointed ahead and said, "What's that guy doing?" I saw right away what she meant. At the far end of the street, there was the silhouette of this man, just standing completely still on the sidewalk. If he was walking or perhaps looking down at something in his hands, it would have been different. But him just standing still doing nothing, apparently looking off straight ahead, it just sent shivers down both our spines. Ashley said this was the only way to get to the canal, unless we cut through people's yards or gross sewage-type water. So we continued walking, but slower, more cautious now. We were half the distance from the man now, when he suddenly turned around. I don't mean he turned his head. No, he literally turned his whole body around at once without even taking a peek to see if we were coming first or anything. We stopped. He was facing us, no doubt. There was a bit of a standoff for a few seconds before he lifted his arm and started waving at us. It wasn't a normal, gentle wave of a hand. No, he was waving his whole arm. It soon transitioned into him making a come here motion with his arm. Ashley and I looked at each other, then started running away down the street, back the way we came. We got winded pretty quickly and stopped to catch our breath in front of some small yellow house. We sat on the grass of the property for a second, just gathering our thoughts. Ashley told me there are a lot of weird people that live down there, especially in the area we were just walking. Now I understood why her parents didn't want her out this late alone. We got up after a couple minutes and started walking back to her house, when we saw him again. That guy was at the end of the street, not moving once again. He was as still as he was before, his same exaggeratedly stiff, arms flatted side posture. He was directly under a streetlight this time, so we could see his features. He was like 40. His hair seemed to be slightly slicked back. His nose seemed to be fucked up, like it was bent to the side. He was smiling too. He wasn't showing teeth though, it was a closed-mouthed smile. He once again started waving at us. Then, I still don't know why, Ashley got up and waved back at him. As she did this, he stopped waving and his smile disappeared. It was only a few seconds later that he erupted into a full-on sprint towards us. Ashley started screaming and running. I got up off the ground and ran as fast as I could after her. I was in pure shock. I think that's why I couldn't get a scream out. That and it would take extra breath that I didn't have. We ran through people's yards, hopped over fences, and ran down different streets until we finally made it back to her house. The back door was locked now, so unfortunately we had to knock on the door, exposing us. Trying to avoid getting in trouble, we simply said we ran to 7-Eleven to get snacks. While Ashley's parents were more upset than mine, they let us off with just a slap on the wrist, telling us not to go out again at that hour. That man's face lit up under that streetlight still terrifies me to this day, 10 years later. My two friends and I were having a sleepover on one of the last summer nights before the new school year started. We didn't want to end it on a dull note, so we decided later that night that we would sneak out and walk about a mile to our local high school. We live in a small town in the middle of bumfuck Massachusetts, so everything is close. Around 12 a.m., both my friends and I left the house and started making our way to the high school. The way there was uneventful, just us walking down the road laughing, sometimes yelling, just being typical dumb teenagers like always. We walked in the middle of the road because it was late and there was hardly any traffic in general. It took about 20 minutes to make it to the high school, where all we did was lay on the turf field, look up at the stars, and talk about the summer, as well as other stupid shit that made us laugh. We actually had such a good time that we laid there for almost an hour, so when we decided to walk back, it was close to 1 o'clock. As we made our way down the road back home, we approached a T intersection. That's where we saw a car. We noticed the car was just sitting there at the stop sign, which was on our side of the road. We could only see the headlights because the rest of the car was blocked by a row of trees. No cars were coming either. Of course, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, but the car didn't move. It just sat there. My friends and I continued to approach the intersection. Suddenly, the car slowly moved further out of the intersection, turned in our direction, and began driving past us. We made out the car to be an old white Mustang. As it passed, my friend yelled something stupid about the car being a V6, making fun of it. It was funny for about 0.8 seconds until the vehicle slammed on the brakes. I felt my heart go into my throat as the car peeled into a fast U-turn. I yelled to my friends, "Run," and we all ran down the street. We ran onto the adjoining road where we first saw the car coming out of. As soon as I made it near the row of trees, I jumped into the woods. So did my friends a few yards down the road. We had about 3 seconds to spare before the car turned down the road. He started slow rolling down the street like he was looking for us, and when he didn't see us, he stopped. Out stepped 2 large men, one holding a massive rod. I muttered "fuck" under my breath as I hid in the leaves. They began walking towards the tree line. I quietly covered my mouth to conceal my breathing. My heart was beating so fast and hard I felt like they would hear it too. The driver, who had a big metal rod in his hand, yelled threats at us into the woods. He continued looking into the woods, along with his buddy. I could feel their eyes pass me over and over again. They just stood there, watching, listening for one of us to make a sound. If he walked only a few more yards from the tree line into the woods, he would find me. His buddy said, "Fuck it, let's go," as he started walking back to the passenger side of the car. "There'll be others out," he said. The driver took one last look into the woods and hopped into his car. The car turned around and took off back down the road past the high school leading out of town. I stayed in the woods for another couple of minutes, waiting to see if the car would come back, which it didn't. I stepped out, along with my friends, further down the road, and we all ran all the way home. We made it back and tried to enjoy the rest of our night. We tried to laugh about it later, but deep down, we knew how scary that was. We thought it was just another crazy experience until 2 days later, when we found out through some local friends of ours that a white Mustang was stolen and involved in a robbery from the next town over, the same night we were chased. I could only imagine what would have happened if those 2 men decided to walk further into the woods. When I was 16, I had a curfew. I wasn't allowed out past 12 on the weekends. My friend Jose was lucky enough to not have a curfew. It was a Saturday in 2013. My parents were asleep. Jose wanted to go explore some abandoned hospital across town, so I snuck out of my room very quietly and tiptoed down the stairs. I exited through the back door and grabbed my bike from the shed, then I left on my way to Jose's house. From there, I met him and we rode across town. It took about 10 minutes. I followed him the whole way, until we ended up at this fenced-off property. Inside of the perimeter was this tall brick building. It didn't look that old. It was once an active hospital many years ago. The town just never bothered to tear it down. We parked our bikes in a big bush out of sight. Next step was hopping the fence, which was easy. The third step was finding a way into the building. We scanned the perimeter by walking around the building, until we found a basement-level window that was already broken open. Jose went in first. I shined my flashlight into the window for him so he could see. It looked a little scary down there, considering how dark it was. Nevertheless, I wasn't going to bitch out now. It was my turn to enter while he held the light. Once we were in and both had our flashlights on though, it was pretty well lit. There wasn't much in this basement level we entered into. It seemed to be mostly for storage and boiler type rooms. We found a stairway upstairs, and once we went through this rusty door, we were on the main floor, in this hallway that still had some of the lights on. It sounds weird, but having some of the hospital lights still on just made this more eerie. Like we were a little more worried about running into someone. It's not like the whole place was lit up. There would be like one light on here and one light on down the hall, with lots of pitch black corners and dark gaps in between. There was also this loud buzzing, whistling sound that we couldn't pinpoint. It was kind of creepy. We started exploring by taking a look into each little room. Most of the expensive stuff seemed to be cleared out, like the beds and equipment. The The place was kind of clean for an abandoned building, though. It seemed not many people explored it. That or just previous people didn't trash it. Though there were some holes in the walls, and some things thrown on the floors, as expected. There was one room with the door closed. We tried opening it, but it was locked. Extremely weird considering every other door was opened. Jose had a good point though. Patients' sleeping room doors aren't permitted to have locks on them, so that meant something was blocking the door. We also heard noises on the other side of the door, like very, very light thump sounds. We went into the adjacent room, and there were a bunch of tiny holes in the walls. There was one hole in the wall adjacent to the next room over with the blocked door, a hole big enough to look through. I quietly got on my knees to look through it. My eyes had to adjust to the darkness, but after a second, I could see a woman in a long white dress, leaning on the far wall, seemingly looking at the door to the room. I was truly about to piss myself after seeing her. I whispered to Jose to look. He didn't believe me, but when he looked through the door, he gasped. We whispered to each other, wondering if we should get out. Jose said yes. He stood up and went to the door to the room. I got on my knees one more time to look through the hole again. As I put my eye up to the hole, the entire room was now blocked, because the woman had gotten on her knees and was looking through the hole back at me with this huge smile on her face. I screamed so loud it definitely echoed throughout the whole building. Jose didn't even ask why, he just ran for it with me back to the way we came in the basement. He crawled up through the window first, then me. The whole time I was trying to squeeze through the window, I was scared she was going to come up behind me and pull my legs back in. When we were both outside, we ran for our bikes and pedaled all the way back to Jose's. We didn't laugh about it at all. It genuinely was nightmare fuel. I went straight home after saying bye to him. I didn't feel safe being anywhere but inside my house, in my bed. I don't believe in ghosts, so I don't believe that was a ghost. I believe there was actually some psychotic woman in there. But all I'm saying is if I did believe in ghosts, I would 100% believe that's what I saw in that room.
Ouija boards have long been a supposed way to connect with spirits and demons. They're sold in most board game aisles and toy stores, and work by one or more participants placing their hands on a plastic or wood piece called a planchette with a small glass circle in it, which is used to highlight a single letter on the board. The participants are then supposed to ask any question, and the piece is supposed to move to form answers out of the letters, supposedly by spirits. The game is normally played as a gag within groups of friends, and the piece is usually moved by one of the participants as a joke or even unintentionally. However, there are countless stories of people who claim to have actually contacted demons and had serious repercussions because of it. Number 6. A mother and daughter who were reportedly told during a Ouija board session that they would soon die were both critically ill in the hospital following a fire at their home, which was engulfed in flames mere hours after the Ouija board made its grim predictions. The two were treated in a hospital after the fire. It's said that the mother and daughter used the Ouija board in an attempt to contact their dead dog on the night before the fire. This beloved family pet was dismembered and killed by the mother's husband, Paul Carroll, who initially claimed he killed the dog because it became possessed following a previous Ouija board session. Paul was sentenced later that month for causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. Following the Ouija board session where the mother and daughter attempted to contact their deceased dog, their neighbor Donna Sowerby revealed that Katrina Livingstone had confessed that the Ouija board had predicted their deaths. Number 5. St. Andrew's Boarding School in Delaware is a well-known private boarding school with a very positive reputation, which may make it more surprising that a group of boys snuck out past curfew one night to use a Ouija board in the woods. The group of 4 came prepared, equipped with candles and a flat surface to place the board and candles on. The 4 boys asked the board various questions, playing religiously, trying not to make a joke of it. There was no movement until one of the boys asked the question, "Will anything bad happen in my future?" The piece then slowly began to move, spelling out the words, "right now."
One of the boys, Ferlin Mako, suddenly started twitching and jerking his arms and head. He then turned and focused on one of the boys next to him with a devilish stare before lunging at him and screaming, "I don't know you." The two other boys grabbed Ferlin off of him and he shortly passed out. The three boys carried him back to his dorm room where they left him in his bed. The next morning, Ferlin showed no signs of remembrance from the previous night. They fessed up and took him to the nurse to see what could have been wrong with him, but of course she didn't have much of an explanation. Number 4. A Redditor who says he was about 12 or 13 was spending the night at his friend Michael's house, goofing around with a Ouija board with Michael and his sister in their basement. They were just kind of scaring themselves, moving the planchette around for fun, not taking it very seriously, when they got a rather disturbing message. They asked the question, "Where are you?" And in response, the planchette started spelling something. I-C-A-N. It continued on until it spelled out the sentence, "I can see you through the window." The three kids laughed, thinking one of the others spelled out the phrase. There was a small window in the basement room where they were, and just the backyard and woods past the driveway were visible through the window, though it was much too dark to see anything outside. They all looked at the window anyway as a kind of natural response, and as they did, they heard that sound. The stomach-churning sound of someone or something from outside in the dark backyard at 11:30 at night viciously knocking on the basement window. Being the young kids they were, they all screamed until Michael's dad came rushing downstairs. When they explained what happened to his dad, he took them outside with the backyard lights on to search for anyone who may be lurking around. As soon as they told him about what the Ouija board said, Michael's dad ushered them inside and suggested they go to bed. That was when he stopped believing what the kids had said. Number 3. In 2014, 3 American friends were taken to the hospital after reportedly becoming possessed by evil spirits while playing with a Ouija board. Alexandra Huerta, aged 22, was playing the game with her brother Sergio, aged 23, and 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuevas at a house in the village of San Juan in southwest Mexico. But minutes into it, she apparently started growling and thrashing around in a trance-like state, as this video captures.
Tranquila ya.
Meanwhile, Sergio and Fernando also reportedly started showing signs of possession, including feelings of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. Paramedics were called and took the 3 to the hospital. They restrained Alexandra to prevent her from hurting herself before treating the 3 with painkillers, anti-stress medication, and eye drops, which seemingly worked. The director of public safety in a nearby town said the medical rescue of these 3 was very complicated. They had involuntary movements and it was very difficult to transfer them to the nearest hospital because they were so erratic. He said they spoke of feeling numbness, double vision, blindness, deafness, hallucinations, muscle spasms, and difficulty swallowing. Alexandra's parents called paramedics after a local Catholic priest refused to perform an exorcism on the 3 because they were not regular churchgoers. Number 2. 3 brothers were using a Ouija board while their parents were out on a cold, rainy night. They were playing the game on the dining room table with the lights dimmed, asking typical questions. They started with questions like, "What is my name?" and "What is your name?" which didn't summon any responses. Then they asked the question, "Is anybody there?" which caused the planchette to slowly move to the word "yes" at the top of the board. The boys then asked the board, "When will we die?" and the board formed the sentence, "Death comes now." Only minutes later, they received a disturbing phone call. It was the boy's father on the other end, crying hysterically. He told one of the boys that he swerved off the road into a tree and their mom died on impact. The dad later blamed himself for driving without getting enough sleep and said he thought he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, so he tried to swerve out of the way,
but the slippery roads only caused him to lose control off the road. Number 1. Frank and Sarah Piscatelli and their friend Joe Pedenzin were in their basement playing with a Ouija board on December 15, 2013. A recent event motivated them to try the Ouija board. Apparently, Frank and Sarah's grandmother contacted her dead husband just days before she passed away using one. Frank and Sarah wanted to contact their grandmother, so they brought along a friend to bring in more energy to the board to increase the chances of getting a response. Instead of contacting their grandmother, however, they allegedly contacted a demon who introduced itself as Zozo. Instead of answering the questions the kids asked, the board spelled out random answers that didn't even relate to the questions. Frank demanded that the demon let them speak to their grandmother, and that's when the lights clicked off in the basement. The power did not go out. They all heard the light switch flick off from the bottom of the stairs. One of them grabbed a flashlight and shined it over to the bottom of the stairs. And for a brief moment, saw a black figure standing by the light switch. Even in the light provided by the flashlight, the figure was completely black. Just as suddenly, the lights turned back on and the figure was gone. The three ran upstairs and locked the basement door. The next day, they tucked the Ouija board back in the closet and never touched it again. Frank and Sarah both agreed that the black figure they saw resembled their grandmother.
Lo voy a matar a todos. ¡Vas a ver! ¡Lo voy a matar a todos! ¡Au! ¡Au!